Chapter 1276. Inside the secret room. Although the sun was shining brightly outside, it was still dusky inside. Only the weak candlelight was supporting it, contending against the darkness. From the study room to the bedroom. The light followed the connecting door and extended through the bricks bit by bit. It extended to the belts scattered on the floor, the dark red clothes, the black outer robe, the green jade hairpin, the snow-white inner clothes. It extended to the side of the bed, where two pairs of shoes were nestled together, incomparably intimate. At this point, the light was already very weak. It slowly climbed onto the bed and then lay on the thin blanket, unable to move anymore. The light fell on the face of the person on the bed. The curled eyelashes trembled. After a while, she slowly opened her eyes. The dark and gentle scene made her a little confused. For a moment, she did not know where she was. Just as she wanted to move her body, she felt her whole body go limp. Following that, a strong restraint came from her waist. Her nose was filled with the unique scent of a man. Suddenly, there were many memories in her mind. Those nimble lips and tongue ignited all over her body. Those omnipresent fingers wandered everywhere. Everywhere they passed, they left a little mark. No matter how she begged for mercy, he used his lips to seal all her moans. She immediately sobered up and did not dare to continue thinking. Without lifting the thin blanket, she could imagine what kind of ambiguous marks there were on her body. She could not help but be a little depressed and angry. Wasn't she just worried about him? Was she wrong? He actually. Her face turned red. He punished her like this. Just as she was immersed in her vexed mood, that pair of black eyes had already slowly opened. Like the rising sun on the horizon, it suddenly lit up the snow-white sparkling skin. It was like a sleeping high mountain flower suddenly blooming. In an instant, 100 flowers bloomed. Suddenly, she felt the temperature in the air drop a few degrees. A pair of burning eyes stared at him. And on her neck, a warm breath blew on it, making it itchy. However, last night's memories flooded in. She had a bad premonition. Could she lie down like a corpse and pretend to be asleep? Just as this thought flashed through her mind, the iron-like hand on her waist suddenly slowly pulled her into his embrace. She wanted to cry, but no tears came out. It seemed that pretending to be dead did not work. After struggling in her heart for a while, she raised her head and smiled brightly. "Morning, big ice cube. Did you sleep well last night?" This question made her want to bite off her own tongue. She had really touched a sore spot. But when she met those enchanting eyes, the distracting thoughts in her mind suddenly stopped. The person in front of her was lying on his side on the couch with one hand propped up by his ear and the other clasped around her waist. There was an indescribable laziness in his expression and posture, a far cry from his usual cold and hard appearance. She did not know why he had changed so much overnight, but she couldn't help but swallow her saliva. It was good to be good-looking. No matter what he did, he was always so attractive. Although Xiao Su was somewhat absent-minded, his gaze never left the little fellow. Seeing her staring at him in a daze, he raised his eyebrows slightly and tightened his grip on her waist, pulling her into his embrace. Under the thin blanket, the two of them were not wearing anything. Being so close to each other made the two of them tremble. Last night when the two of them were hugging each other, they did not feel anything because they had already done so many intimate things. Adding on the fact that they were sleepy, they did not have any scruples. However, at this moment, the two of them were very awake. They were so awake that they could clearly feel the temperature of each other's skin. He was naturally cold and she was naturally warm. When the cold and hot touched, it brought about an indescribable ambiguity in the air. "I slept very well last night," but, she heard him whisper in her ear, like a cool breeze blowing past her ear. Gentle and hoarse, sexy and low. She was bewitched and asked in a daze, "But, what is it?" The young girl in front of him had a rosy complexion that was like peach blossoms in March. It made people want to love her tenderly. The possessiveness in his heart gradually rose. His gaze fell on her slightly parted lips and his heart rippled uncontrollably. But I don't seem to have slept enough. Ah. Although there was no sunlight shining in here, according to her deduction, the sun should be shining brightly outside. Her face turned red again. Although they had slept very late last night, it should be about time now. She did not understand why the big ice cube was still not sleeping enough. Logically speaking, people like them who woke up early to practice martial arts would not have such a situation. Just as she was letting her imagination run wild, the scorching hot breath with the scent of ink was already in front of her. No, to be exact, it stopped less than half an inch away from her. While she was surprised, she felt the large palm on her waist slowly start to circle around her back. That was the most sensitive part of her body besides her ears. Her entire body went limp and she did not even have the strength to pry his hand away. In the air, the dangerous aura kept spinning and expanding. She realized that early in the morning was the time when a man's desire was the strongest. Could it be that the big ice cube wanted? Her scalp tightened and she immediately said in a soft and coquettish voice, Big ice cube, what do you want to do? My hand is still sore and I can't move it. Don't be afraid, I won't let you use your hand again. It's been hard on you tonight. He gently whispered into her ear, as if he was her most intimate lover. Hearing his words, she could not help but feel relieved. The fire in the big ice cube's eyes earlier must have been an illusion. It must have been an illusion. The hand on her waist seemed to be unsatisfied with staying there and slowly moved to other places. Her body could not help but stiffen. She turned her head to look at the person in front of her who still had a lazy look. She gritted her teeth and said, Didn't you say that you won't let me use? Before she could finish her words, the person in front of her suddenly leaned over her soft and delicate body. His lips pressed against hers as he said in a domineering and gentle voice. How could I bear for you to work so hard? I just want you to sleep with me for a while. Their lips pressed against each other, and every word he spat out would rub against her lips. The temperature in the air suddenly rose, and the ambiguity lingered around the two of them. Her heartbeat suddenly became chaotic, and she couldn't stop beating. Before she could even react, he had already entered. Since he was already here, how could he not enter? She was suddenly swept up by him until her head was disoriented. Above her was his plundering and below her was his constant teasing. She felt like her entire body was about to be swallowed up by the flames. Wasn't she just worried that he would suffocate? Why did he have to punish her again and again like this? He really didn't want to suffer any losses. Just as these thoughts flashed through her mind, the person in front of her realized that she was distracted and immediately increased the strength in his hands. Her entire body went numb as she was once again brought to the top of the waves. Chapter 1277. After the lesson of blood and tears, Chu Qingyan came to a conclusion. That was, Big Ice Cube was actually a wolf in human skin. Because wolves were best at holding grudges. Although Big Ice Cube usually didn't care about anything and didn't care about it, every time she did something wrong, he would hold on to her and not let her go. This time, because of a small sentence, he punished her in such a way, and in such a terrible way. Thus, one night passed. One day passed. Another night passed. He was using his body to prove to her that there was nothing wrong with his body. And if it wasn't for the fact that there was nothing in the secret room, he wouldn't mind continuing to prove it. This punishment lasted for 1 day and 2 nights. When she woke up the next day, she was so hungry that her chest was sticking to her back. Only then did he let her go. Thinking of this, her face couldn't help burning hot. And when Big Ice Cube carried her back to the courtyard, everyone looked at her with ambiguous gazes. It made her want to bury her face in Big Ice Cube's chest. It was too embarrassing, too embarrassing. And Hualing and the others kept staring at her stomach with faces full of joy. It seemed like not long later, her stomach would be able to give birth to a little master. Black lines covered her head. She and Big Ice Cube didn't do anything at all right? No, even if they did what they should do and what they shouldn't do, the last step, she buried her face in Big Ice Cube's chest again. The thin clothes penetrated the little fellow's burning hot body. Xiao Su couldn't help hugging her even tighter, and the curve of his lips rose even higher. As expected, men who had eaten and drank their fill were all like this. When he put the little fellow back on the bed, before Xining, Jasper, and Xining came in, he lowered his head and stole a kiss on her lips. He kissed her until she couldn't breathe before reluctantly leaving. Then he reached out to pinch her angry cheeks and said with a smile, "Wash up properly and then come over to eat." She said in a bad mood, "Do you think I can still walk over like this?" "I'll carry you over," he replied without thinking. She was stunned for a moment and happened to catch a glimpse of the little clothes in his eyes. Then, she realized that she was being teased again. She had already received a lot of attention on her way back. She didn't want to experience it again. "No, I refuse to eat with you today." She was angry, but she still added a deadline. Although her small face was wrinkled, after 2 nights of physical exhaustion, coupled with her low and soft voice, she did not have any imposing manner at all. Instead, it was like a kitten tickling his palm. He chuckled softly. Although the mask had been put back on, his eyes still couldn't hide his joy. Chu Qingyan was a little annoyed by his smile, took the pillow and threw it at him. It was a pity that he didn't have any strength left, and the pillow only hit him softly. He took the pillow with one hand and placed it behind her back for her to lean against. He ignored the sparks of embarrassment and anger in her eyes and touched her face. Then, as if he had thought of something, the smile on his lips faded as he looked at her. "What did Higashio Motetsu want from you yesterday?" She slapped his hand away and glared at him in annoyance. "It was the day before yesterday." He then remembered that they had stayed in the secret room for such a long time. He gave a low laugh. "You must have been starving. You look like you've eaten a lot," she retorted without holding back. Seriously, she was almost starving to death. "I feel like I can eat a bit more." His eyes sparkled as he looked at her. She immediately pulled the blanket and looked at him with a frightened expression. "Big ice cube, do you know what's appropriate? If you eat too much, it's easy to burden your stomach and then you'll have a big belly. You don't want to become a fatty, right?" Hearing her talk nonsense, Xiao Su was amused by her, but he still had an indifferent expression on his face. He said thoughtfully, "You're right, you can't eat until you become a fatty." She thought that he had heard everything she said and was about to let out a sigh of relief when she heard his hot words ring in her ear. "So I'll eat slowly bit by bit until you're all in my stomach." Such bloody words, coming from his teasing and charming voice, made her feel like a cooked crayfish in a pot. It was completely cooked, red, and pink. You're too bad." She pointed at his nose and only managed to squeeze out this sentence after a long time. Xiao Su chuckled and took her hand into his palm. He then lowered his head and kissed her. "I'll go back to the courtyard first. Be good and I'll come over to eat later." After saying that, he stood up and pinched her face. Then, like a cat that had stolen a fish, he left in a happy mood. Chu Qingyan, who was frozen like a rock, was crying in her heart. When did the big ice cube suddenly become so good at picking up girls? And his methods were endless. This made it impossible for people to resist him, all right? Moreover, she was an experienced person who was obsessed with looks and voices, and the big ice cube was simply the best in these 2 aspects. He was the best in terms of beauty, the best in terms of natural sexiness. She immediately buried her whole body in the quilt and wailed. She was probably going to be eaten by him for the rest of her life. However, in the end, who would eat who was still an unknown mystery. However, neither of them noticed that the question about Higashio Motetsu just now had disappeared in the midst of their laughter. However, the person who asked the question didn't notice it, and the person who answered didn't notice it either. It was drowned in their conversation just like that. Perhaps in their world, they had already connected their lives and futures together, becoming a fusion world that outsiders couldn't enter. Except for each other, no one else could shake the feelings between them. And because of this, in their eyes, they could only see each other and couldn't tolerate anyone else. At this moment, in the temporary imperial residence of the Southern Blue bridal party, a figure stood by the window. Go. You must deliver the letter to Prince E. If he can come, our plan will be half successful. Yes. After the subordinate left, the figure turned around. It was Yu Qingxi. He revealed a feminine smile that said he was determined to win. Not long after, Prince Yi's estate received an invitation card. Xiao Ho glanced at the invitation card handed to him by his subordinate and frowned slightly. Are you sure this invitation card was sent from the temporary imperial residence? Yes, Lord. This was indeed sent by Yu Qingxi. After hearing his subordinate's words, Xiao Ho waved his hand and dismissed him. Then, he picked up the invitation card and flipped it open. At the front, there were some insignificant words like, I've heard a lot about you. But when he reached the back, his eyes suddenly narrowed. It was about the poison in little rascal's body. He actually dared to use this to threaten him. Lord, this Yu Qingxi sent you an invitation card for no reason. It's too suspicious. Why don't you reject it? Tomorrow is the day we carry out our plan. There can't be any mistakes. Lin Jiangdong stood in front of the table with a serious expression. Xiao Ho muttered to himself for a while, then said to Lin Jiangdong, this prince has decided to go. Chapter 1278. Xiao Ho's decision made Lin Jiangdong anxious. He said in a serious tone, Lord, we can't take this risk at such an urgent moment. You can't agree. This prince knows what to do. It won't affect tomorrow's plan, Xiao Ho said calmly. Yu Qingxi's actions in Southern Blue show that he's a gentleman on the surface but a vile person in the dark. He's not presentable at all. Why do you want to meet with him? Maybe he's plotting something. Oh right, I remember now. In Southern Blue, the princess had a dispute with Yu Qingxi. You, teacher, don't make wild guesses. This prince has made up his mind. You don't have to say anything more. If you have the time, why don't you go and check whether tomorrow's details are properly arranged? Only he could discipline little scoundrel. No one else had the right to criticize her. Although Lin Jiangdong didn't agree, he could only agree and prepare to leave the room when he saw Lord's firm tone and the signs of anger. Wait, have you sent the betrothal gifts? Xiao Ho turned to look at him. Lin Jiangdong immediately lowered his head and replied, I sent someone to deliver them to the relay station yesterday. Very good. You may leave. Lin Jiangdong wanted to say something, but he didn't have the chance. He sighed softly, turned around, and left. Lord treated this princess so well that there was nothing to say. He basically emptied the entire treasury of Prince Yi's estate just to give her betrothal gifts. He shook his head. Could it be that Lord was also sad that no one locked him up? After the room returned to silence, Xiao Ho imagined what little scoundrel's expression would be if she received the betrothal gifts. Although the estate's assets were only a part of his wealth, he was willing to use everything in the estate to hold a grand wedding banquet for her. She was alone in the Sichuan with no relatives or friends. He couldn't treat her unfairly. Xiao Ho pursed his lips. So he couldn't drag this matter on. If Yu Qingxi didn't reveal any more information about the life-severing poison because he didn't show up, then he would probably regret it. Although he had received news that Qing Yanluo had arrived at the King of England's residence, he couldn't place all his hopes on her. What if she didn't have the confidence to cure little rascal? So no matter whether what Yu Qingxi said was true or false, he had to make a trip. He would rather walk through a mountain of swords and a sea of flames than let go of this opportunity. After making up his mind, he glanced at the agreed time and stood up. Facing the empty room, he ordered, order the first team to accompany me. Yes. Suddenly, there was a fluctuation in the air, but it quickly disappeared. Xiao Ho straightened his clothes and strode out. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, he appeared outside the restaurant. Although it was a restaurant in name, it was actually no different from a red light district. It was just that it was much grander than those places. It was opened in the name of discussing literary talent. The women standing outside didn't have the air of a prostitute. Each of them was dignified and elegant, looking no different from the young ladies of aristocratic families. But those who were well versed in the business inside all knew that although these women looked extremely pure on the outside, their skills in bed were even worse than those of the courtesans. The courtesans were charming on the outside, but the women here were charming on the inside. Their eyes were very sharp. They could judge whether a person was rich or noble. Therefore, they could easily win the favor of the distinguished guests who came here for pleasure under the pretext of discussing the 4 arts of zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. When the elegant and noble Xiao Hui appeared, regardless of whether it was the women standing outside or the absent-minded women inside, their eyes all lit up. What a tall and straight noble young man. The restaurant had been open for a long time, but this was the first time it welcomed such a noble young man. At first glance, one could tell that he came from a big family. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such an otherworldly temperament. Because Xiao Ho always stayed at home in the name of recuperating, he rarely attended banquets. Therefore, even if he walked on the street, not many people could recognize him as the sickly Prince Yi. These women didn't swarm up like prostitutes. Instead, they respectfully surrounded him and asked if he needed any help. However, each of them puffed out their chests and sucked in their bellies, trying to show their best side in front of him. Of the people who came here, which one of them wasn't here to seek pleasure? Therefore, each of them had a tacit understanding to secretly compete for his favor. However, Xiao Ho couldn't help but feel disgusted when he saw so many women surrounding him. Each of them had a lustful look in their eyes and approached him quietly. He raised his hand and the guards behind him immediately stepped forward and separated these women. They didn't have any protective feelings for the fairer sex. These women looked at Xiao Ho with some frustration and pity. At this moment, a woman who looked like a manager saw this scene and immediately walked up. Her eyes fell on Xiao Ho. He was dressed luxuriously and behaved appropriately. At first glance, she could tell that he wasn't an ordinary person. She turned her head and scolded the restless women, "What are you all standing here for? Hurry up and greet the guest." Most of the women were afraid of the female manager's dignity and retreated. However, there were still some who stood there eagerly. One of them said unwillingly, "Sisterly, this young master is also a guest. Why don't you let Yuan greet him?" Manager Li looked at this unobservant woman who forgot herself in front of a handsome man. She couldn't help but glare at her fiercely. "What nonsense are you talking about? Don't block the young master's way." The women then dispersed in a hubbub. Xiao Ho didn't care about what these people said at all. He looked around at the layout of the restaurant and narrowed his eyes. This layout could be said to be extravagant. Just the 2 flower pots placed at the staircase alone were worth more than what an ordinary person could earn in a lifetime. It wasn't that he hadn't heard of this restaurant, but because his business wasn't involved in this area, he didn't pay much attention to it. From the looks of it, to be able to build such a large restaurant here and operate such a business, if there was no one behind it, it probably wouldn't last more than a few months. Moreover, this restaurant had been operating for at least 3 to 4 years. When he returned, he must investigate who was behind this. At this moment, Manager Li had already leaned over. She folded her hands on her waist and curtsied to him. Then, she fiddled with her still charming slender waist and said delicately, "May I ask what young master needs?" The 4 treasures of the study, the zither, chess, poetry, calligraphy, and painting. Before she could finish, Xiao Ho had already interrupted her. "Is there a young master with the surname you hear?" Manager Li was stunned. His smile just now was so charming that her heart couldn't help but soften. However, she quickly regained her senses. "There is a young master Yu who booked an elegant room an hour ago. May I ask if he is young master's friend?" "He can't be considered a friend, but you can bring me down to meet him." Xiao Ho was very disgusted with Yu Qingxi. To be able to arrange to meet at such a place, it was enough to see that this person's character wasn't very good. He really should let little rascal take a good look. Was she blind or something? She actually fell for such a refined scum. At the same time, he felt that it wasn't worth it for her, but at the same time, he felt a little uncomfortable. Manager Li very attentively led them upstairs. Chapter 1279. The women downstairs all stared at Xiao Ho's back with infatuation. Their usual reserved manner in front of guests had all disappeared at this moment. This is the first time I've seen such a perfect man. His every movement carries a noble air, as if he's a man from a painting, the woman in charge of painting said while holding her heart. Did you see just now? When he smiled, it was as if a spring breeze had suddenly come and thousands of pear trees had bloomed. The woman in charge of reciting poetry sighed with emotion. If I had to use a song to describe it, I think it would be the poem, Wei Feng Qi Ao. The woman in charge of reciting poetry couldn't help but sing, there's a bandit gentleman, like cutting, like exchanging pointers, like polishing, like grinding. If Peng Zhijing was present, she would probably vomit out the food she ate last night. Along the way, Manager Li tried to find a topic to inquire about his identity. Unfortunately, she was tactfully rejected by him. When they reached the door of the elegant room, Manager Li reluctantly shut her mouth. Xiao Ho suddenly had a comparison in his heart. Although little rascal was chatty and noisy, she didn't make him feel annoyed. However, this Manager Li made him have the urge to throw her out. With this comparison, he felt that his little rascal was still very obedient. Sure enough, without comparison, there would be no harm. After someone knocked on the door of the elegant room, it was quickly opened from the inside. A person who looked like an attendant bowed to Xiao Ho and then raised his hand to invite him in. My young master is already waiting inside. Xiao Ho nodded and left the guard outside the door. He walked in alone. The attendant also left the elegant room and turned to close the door, standing guard outside. Xiao Ho entered the room and turned around after a few steps. When he looked up, he saw Yu Qingxi sitting in the room with light muslin and Monli. At this moment, he was drinking alone. When he heard the footsteps, he put down the wine cup and stood up with a smile to meet Xiao Ho's scrutinizing gaze. He bowed slightly and said, "It's been a few days since we last met. Prince Yi, how have you been?" Xiao Ho smiled and said, "Lord Yu is too courteous. There's no need for such formalities outside." Yu Qingxi stood up straight and praised, "You are indeed the kind-hearted Prince Yi. You don't put on any airs when you speak. Last time we parted in a hurry on the street, and a few days ago at the courier station, I didn't have the chance to chat with Prince Yi. This humble one is very regretful. Seeing that the wedding date is approaching, the Lord must be very busy and I dare not disturb you. But then I remembered that after the marriage, this humble one will immediately depart for Southern Blue, so I could only invite Prince Yi to come here for a chat." Xiao Ho knew that he was just being polite, so he smiled and said, "Lord Yu is too polite. I've long heard of you. You're one of the most outstanding talents of the new generation in Southern Blue. Your father is the famous Prime Minister of Southern Blue. I'm sure you'll be able to go even further in the future." Yu Qingxi was displeased at the mention of his father again, but he still maintained a cordial look on his face. He stretched out his hand and said, "Prince Yi, please take a seat. Let's drink and enjoy the fun while talking." Xiao Ho nodded and said, "This is Lord Yu's plan. I'll leave it to you to decide. Prince Yi is so forthright. All right, then this humble one will be bold enough to make the decision. I heard that the zither music here is superb. This humble one has already taught it to others." After Yu Qingxi finished speaking, he clapped his hands. A few graceful women carrying zither walked in. After bowing to the two of them, they walked to the side where the veil was draped and sat down. After a few adjustments, a clear and elegant tune flowed out from the veil. At a glance, several graceful figures could be seen behind the veil. They kept waving their fingers, and the sound of the zither gradually became more cheerful and pleasant. However, Xiao Ho suddenly frowned. There was a faint fragrance in the air. It was different from the smell in the building just now, which made him alert. Seeing that Xiao Ho was suddenly silent, Yu Qingxi subtly curved his eyebrows. A trace of shrewdness flashed through his eyes, and then he resumed his elegant and cordial look. "Lord, don't you feel that there's a fragrance in the room? I heard that this is the specialty of this restaurant. In order to relax the guests, there's a unique fragrance in the room. This fragrance has the effect of refreshing the mind. I stayed here for less than an hour just now, and I feel that I'm full of energy. The headache from last night's wind has unknowingly eased. This restaurant really lives up to its reputation. Listening to Yu Qingxi's seemingly unintentional introduction, Xiaohou let down some of his guard. Lord, this is also the specialty of this restaurant. It's a gentleman's brew. Lord, please try it. Looking at the overly cordial Yu Qingxi, Xiaohou couldn't help but take a few more glances at the newly served wine. When Yu Qingxi handed over the wine cup, he tactfully refused. This prince is unwell all year round, and the imperial physician instructed me to abstain from drinking. Therefore, this prince can only apologize for Lord Yu's hospitality. Hearing this, Yu Qingxi revealed a disappointed expression. However, he didn't want to show it, so he forced a smile. Since Prince Yi doesn't want to drink, then this one won't drink either. How can this one drink when the guest is drinking? As he spoke, he ordered the wine to be taken away. Yu Qingxi's performance and expression just now made Xiaohou even more suspicious that something was added to the wine. His gaze towards Yu Qingxi couldn't help but turn cold. However, Yu Qingxi seemed to be unaware and continued to greet him enthusiastically. Xiaohou then continued to practice Taiji fist with him on the table. At this moment, while Xiaohou went to Yu Qingxi's invitation, Peng Zhijing was a little restless at the relay station. Previously, when she found out that she could unlock the exquisite lock and regain her freedom, she felt both happy and melancholy. These 2 days, her heart was a little adrift. She couldn't tell if it was because she couldn't bear to leave or because she wanted to leave as soon as possible. These indescribable emotions kept tangling in her heart. On the side, Lu watched her princess frown and sigh. She couldn't help but feel down along with the princess. Yesterday, the princess sat on the windowsill in a daze for an entire day. Today, an entire morning had passed, and she was still like this. She didn't know if it was because Lord Yu or Prince Yi had hurt the princess the day before yesterday that made her mood so bad. She didn't look as cheerful and energetic as before. However, she thought of another possibility. Her eyes lit up and she immediately leaned in front of the princess. Princess, is it because the wedding date is approaching that you're unconsciously agitated? This servant heard that this is called anxiety before marriage. The closer the wedding date, the more obvious it will be. She only noticed the words "the wedding date is approaching" from Lu Er's words. She couldn't help but count the time. It turned out that in a dozen days, it would be the day of the political marriage. Because she had never taken the wedding date to heart, she thought that she would have run far away by then. However, when she heard Lu mention it, her heart couldn't help but beat violently. Was this the day that belonged to her and Xiaohou's wedding? These simple words made her eyes soften involuntarily, as well as yearning and longing. Chapter 1280. At this moment, Lu noticed the change in her princess's expression. She was delighted and tried even harder to match her princess with Prince Yi. Your Highness, people say that people who get this condition are worried that their husbands won't treat them well. But I think Prince Yi treats you very well. You don't know that the betrothal gifts from Prince Yi's mansion have filled the entire street, and you can't see the end of them. There are all kinds of rare treasures, silks and satins, as well as the best rare herbs. Those who laughed at the princess for choosing Prince Yi are now envious. They all say that the betrothal gifts cost all the wealth of Prince Yi's mansion. It's enough to show how sincere Prince Yi is to you. Peng Zhijing was stunned by Lu Er's incessant speech. Betrothal gifts? What do you mean? How come I don't know about it? Lu sighed and looked at her princess sadly. The betrothal gifts were delivered yesterday, but you locked yourself in your room for a whole day and ignored everyone. So, Lord Tori had the betrothal gifts put away first. It was a spectacular scene. I even went to watch. There were so many betrothal gifts that the whole courier station couldn't fit them. Lord Tori was so helpless that he borrowed a courtyard from the Emperor of Sichuan to put them in. Peng Zhijing opened her eyes wide. The whole courier station couldn't fit them. All of Prince Yi's mansion's wealth. What kind of concept was that? She once heard in a story that an emperor said to his sweetheart, "I'm willing to sacrifice the whole country to marry you. In this life, I only want you." The sun and the moon were eternal, and the vow would never change. Why did she suddenly think of this story? She remembered that a long time ago, she was so envious of such an unparalleled love. Now that she was implanted in such a plot, it was unreal. Lu thought she had convinced her princess, so she started to talk again. In today's Sichuan and the capital city, who else can spend all of their wealth to marry a bride? Even those nobles don't have such courage, wealth, and ability. Princey wouldn't do this if he didn't treat you with sincerity. I'm so envious that you can marry someone who loves you so much and treats you so well. Pang Zhijing was stunned by Lu's starry eyes. How did Xiao Ho treat her? If he asked himself honestly, ever since they met, other than when he wanted to use her, he had never treated her unfairly. Ever since the imperial decree for the marriage alliance was issued, he could be said to be obedient to her in every way, never letting her suffer any grievances. Now that he saw her alone in Xixian, so much dowry, it was actually because he was afraid that Nansung would not be willing to spend more money on her, so he put up a front for her. A warm current suddenly surged in her heart and slowly flowed through her entire body. The gloominess from before disappeared like smoke in thin air. There was only one day left. If she was still immersed in his words, then she was afraid that she wouldn't even be able to see him for the last time. She was very touched by the betrothal gift. But she had already decided to leave. She couldn't give up her freedom to pursue an illusory relationship. But before she left, she had to thank him properly. If it wasn't for him, she might have died on the way. Lu wanted to continue, but she saw her master suddenly stand up with a determined look on her face. "Princess, Pang Zhijing turned and smiled at her, sweeping away the haze of the past 2 days. She was pure and naughty. "Let's go to Prince Yi's estate." Lu's eyes brightened. Did the princess think it through and stop the Cold War with Prince Yi? But before she finished thinking, the princess had already walked out. Lu immediately grabbed the handkerchief on the table and followed. "Princess, wait for me." "Xiao Ho, if I'm leaving, I'll say goodbye to you." Inside the restaurant, Xiao Ho and Yu Qingxi had already talked about the local customs and customs of southern Song to Sichuan's culture and geography. Although they didn't like each other, they still admired each other's knowledge. However, Xiao Ho didn't forget the purpose of his visit today. He saw that Yu Qingxi was still leisurely chatting with him about everything. It was obvious that if he didn't bring it up himself, he wouldn't talk about it at all. Sure enough, people who knew secrets were always fearless. Xiao Ho didn't intend to beat around the bush with him. He smiled faintly and asked, "Lord Yu, you mentioned on the invitation that the princess was poisoned. What's the matter?" Yu Qingxi was holding a teacup to his lips. After hearing his words, his lips curled up imperceptibly. Finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He put down the teacup and said with a trace of regret, "I heard about this by accident. It's said that someone wanted to harm the princess, but didn't want her to die so easily. Therefore, they used a slow-acting poison called life-severing. When the poison accumulates to a certain extent, it will take effect and torture the victim until they wish they were dead. Only then will they gradually lose their vitality. This method is extremely cruel." He found out about this from the Crown Prince's people. It was obvious that the Crown Prince wanted to use this method to leave the poison in the princess's body. After a long time, she would have married into Sichuan. At the same time, Southern Song would have enough strength to go to war. When the poison took effect and the princess died, it would be a good reason for them to send troops. Yu Qingxi couldn't help but admire the Crown Prince's method from the bottom of his heart. This was the so-called casting a long line to catch a big fish. Now, he used this method to trick Xiao Ho into coming here. Of course, he didn't know how to detoxify the poison because the Crown Prince couldn't develop an antidote for this poison. Perhaps there was no antidote. Xiao Ho couldn't help but narrow his eyes. Although he was anxious, his voice was as calm as usual. "Then does official you have any clues about the antidote?" Yu Qingxi shook his head. No clues, but I do have a question. No clues? Xiao Ho immediately understood. Yu Qingxi was only using this information to lure him here. What was his purpose? Xiao Ho's gaze immediately turned cold. What question? Yu Qingxi played with the teacup in his hand. His humble and enthusiastic appearance slowly faded away. Soon, his face was filled with ridicule. Your Highness Prince Yi, after sitting for so long, don't you feel uncomfortable? Or is your body so weak that you can't feel anything? He mocked mercilessly. Without a mask to hide his face, he revealed it to Xiao Ho. After hearing his words, Xiao Ho immediately wanted to stand up. However, his vision swayed and he couldn't stand steadily. He could only reach out to hold on to the corner of the table to prevent himself from falling. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "What did you do to this prince?" Chapter 1281. Although it was one thing to decide to come and see him, it was another to actually see him. She struggled in the carriage for a long time, feeling uneasy. That day, his expression was so bad. It was obvious that he didn't want to see her again. Now that she came to him of her own accord, would she be ridiculed by him again? Didn't he say that everything about her had nothing to do with him, and that she was just an insignificant imperial consort? Her originally excited heart sank bit by bit at this moment. By the time she arrived at Prince Yi's mansion, her previous nervousness had disappeared. All that was left was guessing how he would feel when he saw her later. Forget it. Since she was already here, there was no point in thinking about it. Anyway, after today, she would have nothing to do with him anymore. She took a deep breath, then got off the carriage with Lu Er and went straight to the mansion's gate. Pang Zhijing had become a frequent visitor of the Prince Yi's mansion. She was Lord's most frequent visitor. In a dozen days, she would become the mistress of the Prince Yi's mansion. Therefore, the guards at the gate were very respectful and enthusiastic to her. They let her in directly without even announcing her arrival. These people's reactions were much better than the first time she entered the Prince Yi's mansion alone. Pang Zhijing nodded slightly at them, then strode in with Lu Er. After entering the Prince Yi's mansion, her eyes inadvertently glanced at the surrounding scenery. She suddenly had a strange feeling in her heart. Although this was Xiao Ho's Prince Yi's mansion, after coming and going so many times, she found that she was very familiar with every blade of grass and every tree. She could even call out the names of the servant girls and manservants who walked by. Perhaps this had something to do with the small number of people in his mansion. This seemed to be her second home. It was much better than that cold relay station. Although Xiao Ho always treated people with less sincerity, everyone in the Prince Yi's mansion was very loyal to him. Every time she came, everyone was very enthusiastic to her, as if they had already treated her as a member of the Prince Yi's mansion. It felt so good to have a home. She missed it so much. Just as she was trying hard to engrave the people and things here in her mind as she walked, the steward came up to her. "Princess, no one informed me of your sudden arrival. This old servant was not able to receive you in time. It is this old servant's fault." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the butler's self-criticism. She hurriedly stopped the butler from rambling on and asked directly, "Is Lord in the manor?" Hearing this, the butler looked at the little princess in front of him with an ambiguous smile, thinking that the wedding date was approaching and the two of them were about to get married. After clarifying their relationship, they could see each other every day. However, the little princess must have missed their lord very much. That was why she was so anxious to enter the residence to look for him at this time. It could be seen how deep the relationship between the two was. The steward couldn't help but feel moved and his eyes turned red. If Pang Zhijing knew what the butler was thinking, she would probably bleed. These days, not only did young men and women have a gossipy and fantasizing heart, but even the elderly couldn't avoid it. The steward said regretfully, "His Highness went out in the afternoon and hasn't returned yet. Why don't Princess go play in His Highness's courtyard for a while? His Highness should be back by dinner time." In the past, no one could enter Lord's courtyard, not to mention a personal servant girl or manservant. Perhaps he was the only one in the entire manor who could enter. However, it was different after the princess came. Lord never restricted her range of activities. Even the study, which had always been closed, could be freely entered by the princess. The butler sighed with emotion again. Lord treated the princess differently. He originally thought that he wouldn't be able to hold the little heir in his lifetime, but this wish might come true next year. Pang Zhijing was puzzled when she heard this. How could someone who usually didn't go out not be in the manor? However, at this time, she had no other choice but to stay in the manor and wait for his return. She had to wait for him today. Whether it was a confession or a farewell, more importantly, she wanted to see him one last time. Thus, when she turned to tell the butler to go about his business and ignore her, she saw the butler's gaze land on her stomach as if something would jump out. She hurriedly coughed lightly and said, "Butler, I'm going to the courtyard first. If Lord returns, have someone inform me." The butler nodded repeatedly and then watched their future princess consort's figure disappear into the distance. He wondered if it was time to buy some baby equipment. What should he buy? At this time, the atmosphere in the elegant room started to change. "What did you do to Lord?" Yu Qingxi opened her folding fan and said innocently, "This one didn't do anything." "Is that so?" "It better be as you say." He couldn't use his inner energy as if it was wrapped up by something. Xiao Ho was greatly shocked, but his expression was calm. Because he couldn't stand steadily, he sat back down. Yu Qingxi was puzzled when she saw him like this. He was clearly drugged, so why was he still able to stay awake? Usually, someone with such a weak constitution wouldn't be able to control himself. Perhaps he didn't breathe in enough pollen. With this thought, Yu Qingxi dispelled the idea of leaving immediately and continued to accompany him to kill time. What Yu Qingxi didn't know was that Xiao Ho's body was even healthier than a normal person's. His weakness was only his appearance. However, the drug had already taken effect in Xiao Ho's body, but he was able to restrain it. "Lord, this one actually has something that is extremely puzzling. Would the Lord please dispel this one's confusion?" Faced with Yu Qingxi's deliberately mystifying act, Xiao Ho tugged the corner of his mouth. "Ask away." Yu Qingxi smiled. "Then this one won't be polite. The princess' reputation in Southern Blue is so bad that it can be said that no one is willing to befriend her. Back then, she always followed behind this one and couldn't be shaken off no matter how hard I tried. Moreover, she often used underhanded methods to get close to me. Why are you so protective of her and even agreed to a marriage alliance? Could it be that the Lord has a special fetish for women with this kind of character? Otherwise, with the Lord's status, what kind of woman can't he want? Why would he want someone with a bad reputation and bad character? Have you said enough?" A cold glint appeared in his eyes as his elegant features burst forth with a suppressive might. This aura caused Yu Qingxi's breathing to become chaotic. What a powerful feeling. He immediately looked straight at Xiao Ho. At this moment, he had a weak appearance, as if everything he saw just now was an illusion. Yu Qingxi sneered. Trash was trash. What kind of aura was there to speak of? He must have seen wrongly just now to see killing intent in his eyes. At this moment, Xiao Ho calmly looked at him and said with a mocking tone, "She liked you for so many years and didn't hesitate to give up so much for you, only to receive this kind of result. If she saw your face right now, she might regret being blind all those years." Yu Qingxi's face turned malevolent from his words. "Xiao Ho, what do you have to be proud of? Whether or not you can walk out of here alive tonight is still a mystery." Chapter 1282. It was already evening. Because it was summer, the days were long and the nights were short. The sun was still hanging high in the sky. Because not everyone could enter his courtyard, Lu was given a day off by her to find someone to play with. She would bring her along when she was about to leave. Lu agreed happily. When she left, she even looked at her ambiguously. This made Pang Zhijing very depressed. The butler was like this, and Lu was also like this. Were they in cahoots? She smiled and shook her head. Then, she entered his courtyard alone. Once a person was in the mood of parting, they would be very sensitive to the things around them. For example, at this moment, when she stood in the courtyard, she felt that whether it was the grass, the trees, the flowers, the leaves, or the dust in the air, they all had his unique scent. He was like the setting sun, pouring down on this piece of land. Every place was tainted with his breath, his smell, as if his figure was everywhere. A faint bitter smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Her life, her memories, were also corroded by him in this way. He was pervasive and meticulous. So much so that she did not know how long it would take to wash away the traces he left in her life. They had been together for less than a year, but she had to use 10 years, decades, or even a lifetime to forget him. Forgetting a person did not depend on how long it took to like or fall in love with him. It depended on how many traces that person left in your life. However, to her, this deal was really not worth it. But, what could she do? The heart could not be controlled. Falling in love with someone was not something she could decide. If people could control their own emotions, then how could there be so many love and hatred in the world? So many enemies and resentful couples? Unknowingly, she walked to a small flower bed. This place was in the corner. If one did not observe carefully, they would not notice it. This small flower bed was probably 10 feet long and wide. Some flowers she did not know were planted in it. There were purple, blue, white, and different varieties, but they all looked very beautiful. Cha, she seemed to have stepped on something. She moved her foot away and found that it was a small shovel. She looked around and found that there was also a water bottle and nutrients. Xiao Ho was basically the only one in this courtyard. Then, did he take care of this flower bed himself? She squatted down and picked up the shovel. She imagined him using his fair and slender fingers to hold this down-to-earth shovel and then focusing on weeding the small flower bed. He looked so calm and gentle, and she couldn't help but feel her eyes move. Suddenly, she felt that he was like a secret castle. At first glance, she could not see his full appearance, and every time she got closer, she would discover a surprise and a side of him that no one knew. She remembered that when she was at Grandma Ren's house, the person who should not have done any household chores actually lowered himself to roll up his sleeves and light the fire by the stove. With this premise, she was not surprised that he planted flowers. What kind of person was he? Even though she had liked him for so long, she couldn't accurately describe it with words. He was usually gentle and refined, and his smile was filled with affection. When scheming against others, he remained calm and collected. When she was angry, her smile was gentle, but her eyes were as cold as ice. When he was in a good mood, his eyes were shining. He would despise her for being noisy and annoyed that she was asking for trouble. When she was happy, his poisonous tongue was merciless. When she was hurt, he silently gave her medicine. When she was sad, he lent her his shoulder. When she was angry, he loved to tease her, this kind of person that you felt was gentle yet fickle, fickle yet passionate, passionate yet emotionless, was like the most unpredictable cloud in the world. You never knew what kind of form he would appear in front of you in the next moment. And because of this, you wanted to get closer to him, understand him, and hug him. No matter which one it was, he was the loneliest one in her heart. She had heard people say that people who stayed together because they did not understand each other and separated because they understood each other. At that time, she felt that this sentence was quite reasonable. Until today, she realized that the more she understood Xiao Ho, the more mysterious he was. She could not help but want to get closer to him. He had such a powerful and mysterious ability. He was like a whirlpool. Once you were sucked in, you would never be able to get out. But now, she had to restrain herself and not step into that whirlpool. Because if she did not get a response, she could only be consigned to eternal damnation and be smashed to pieces. Can't walk out of here alive. Xiao Ho narrowed his eyes dangerously and looked at Yu Qingxi with a torch-like gaze. Yu Qingxi was frightened by his gaze, but he quickly regained his senses. Xiao Ho was now a fish on the chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered by him. He quickly regained his confidence. He sneered. I've drugged this room with heart confusion powder. Once you breathe it in, your mind will start to become lax, and then, he laughed lowly with a wretched tone, and an expression of watching a good show appeared on his face. The words that Yu Qingxi didn't finish were probably not anything good, but it was also because of her explanation that Xiao Ho felt an inexplicable heat rising from his dantian and slowly sweeping through his entire body. If he wasn't able to use his internal energy to suppress it, he was afraid that his mind would have already scattered like what Yu Qingxi said. He gripped the corner of the table tightly and looked at Yu Qingxi with an icy gaze. So, the life-severing poison is only a pretense. Your true motive is to kill this prince? Yes, it's just an excuse. I didn't expect you to really fall for it. TSK TSK TSK. Prince Yi, oh Prince Yi, why are you treating Pang Zhijing so differently? Yu Qingxi shook his head and continued. She can even abandon me, the person who has pursued her for many years, like a worn-out shoe. How long do you think you can stay in her heart, someone who just appeared in her life? Don't be fooled by how she seems to be very affectionate. She's actually the most heartless one. So don't be silly. You won't have a good ending with her. Xiao Ho laughed lowly and then slowly raised his eyes under Yu Qingxi's puzzled gaze. His gaze was sharp and the corner of his mouth held a sneer. Then why are you treating this prince like this now? Could it be that you didn't care when she was pursuing you, but when she doesn't want you anymore, you're rushing to stick to her? Lord Yu, your actions are very shameless. As if someone had stepped on her sore spot, Yu Qingxi's expression was both embarrassed and angry. It could be said that she was angry out of embarrassment. But after being in the political arena for so many years, she could more or less control her emotions. At least she had to maintain her poise on the surface. He took a deep breath and said with contempt and a hint of anger in his words, I admit that I don't want her to have an easy time when I see her happy and complacent. I haven't avenged Ro, for the matter of her plotting against her, so I set you up to embarrass her so that she can't get married in the future. Because such a woman doesn't deserve happiness. Xiao Ho's face grew darker and darker. However, at this moment, Yu Qingxi seemed to have discovered something extraordinary. She suddenly sized him up with a smile. Prince Yi, you're so angry. Don't tell me you've fallen in love with that ruffian and uncultured Pang Zhijing? Xiao Ho instantly widened his eyes. This sentence was like a stick that knocked away all his anger and directly hit the door in the depths of his heart. Then, there was a loud bang. Chapter 1283. The afterglow of the setting sun finally disappeared from the horizon and night fell. Lanterns were hung in front of each house, illuminating the path home. Pang Zhijing stayed in the yard from evening until the sun set. Finally, she slept on the table and woke up, but she still didn't see anyone. She couldn't help being a bit puzzled. Although this Xiao Ho was full of evil tricks, he never stayed out late. He stayed in the palace and didn't go out if he could, so why hadn't he come back yet? Could it be that he was held back by some important matter? Or did he meet with some danger? The former was possible, but as for the latter... She shook her head. It was good enough that he didn't scheme against others. How could such a smart person be held back by others? However, she didn't know that this time, he had indeed been held back by others. Moreover, he had been schemed against by others and the source was her. She paced around the room to kill time. She carefully and seriously looked at all the decorations in the room. Now, she could even recite the entire room's decorations with her eyes closed. The reason was that it was too boring. But there was one thing that she was curious about. For a proud man like Xiao Ho, why would he put pink decorations in the room? For example, pink bed curtains, pink bead curtains, and pink tea mats. She didn't think that when she came here before, she didn't see such strange decorations. Wasn't this suitable for a little girl? It was hard to imagine why Xiao Ho would put them in the room. But it looked quite pleasing to the eye. It was much better than the cold and plain color from before. After admiring it for a while, she still felt bored. The wait felt endless and her heart was anxious, making her feel more and more impatient. How about she go back first? But like this, he would go to Hugua Temple tomorrow and she wouldn't have time to send him off. Then wouldn't she not be able to see him one last time? No, she couldn't just leave like this. The meeting between the two of them was full of drama and was caught off guard. Their parting couldn't be anticlimactic. However, she waited for another half an hour. The stars were already out but he still hadn't come back. It looked like he wouldn't be coming back tonight. She stomped her feet gloomily. This Xiao Ho didn't go out earlier or later, but just had to disappear at this time. It was too infuriating. She looked around the room and suddenly stopped at a corner. She couldn't help but walk over. There was a table near the window with the 4 treasures of the study on it. She picked up the brush and pondered for a while. Then, she walked around the table and sat down on the chair to grind the ink for herself. Since he couldn't say it out loud, he would just write it down on paper. Perhaps those unspeakable words could be better expressed in words. After she finished grinding the ink, she spread out a piece of paper on the table. She picked up the brush and pondered for a moment before dipping it in the ink and slowly writing. Fortunately, when she was young, she learned calligraphy from her grandfather for a period of time. She was also sent to the children's palace by her parents for a few winter and summer vacations. Writing a letter was still manageable. Although her handwriting was not the most beautiful, at least it was not ugly. When she started writing, memories flooded her mind. From the time they first met until now, it covered all the interactions between the two of them. She just realized that there were so many things she wanted to say to him in her heart. However, there were too many things she wanted to say, but she couldn't write them all down. Unrequited love was a pantomime. If she said it out loud, it would become a tragedy. She didn't want to give him any more trouble at the end. When they came, they had to be clean. When they left, they had to be clean as well. Thousands of words, thousands of words, thousands of words, thousands of words. Then, all that was left was to take care. Under the night sky, the lanterns on every floor of the restaurant were hung up. It was like a dazzling pagoda emitting colorful light. The light shone in through the window, enveloping the two of them in a gorgeous halo. Yu Qingxi saw Xiao Ho's expression suddenly change after she finished speaking. His face was a little ugly. As expected, I guessed it. It turns out that you really like that silly girl. Ha! Prince Yi's taste is really unique. Xiao Ho still hadn't recovered from what she said before. Fell in love with her. How was that possible? But why couldn't he refute Yu Qingxi's words? He couldn't even say that she was talking nonsense. Could it be that he was really like what Yu Qingxi said and had feelings for her? But no matter what the reason was, his words slandering the little rascal at this moment made him feel extremely uncomfortable. Lord Yu, I think you just hate her because you can't have her. That's why you want to break us up. You're just a so-so. Xiao Ho's sarcasm made Yu Qingxi's anger reach its peak. It could be said that he was guilty and angry. What nonsense are you talking about? My fiancé is It's impossible for me to like that uneducated princess. But after he finished speaking, Xiao Ho still had a sarcastic look. He was about to go crazy. But when he glanced at Xiao Ho's abnormal blush from the corner of his eyes and his clenched fists, he suddenly smiled evilly. Lord, are you having a hard time holding it in? Don't worry, you'll soon have sex. Today, I invited the Lord over because I wanted to give the Lord a taste of meat before the Lord's wedding. But, he didn't care about Xiao Ho's sharp gaze at all and continued proudly, but I don't know if your weak body can withstand the grace of so many beauties. I'm very curious. Xiao Ho looked at him angrily, but the strength in his body was gradually draining away. If he hadn't bitterly supported himself, he probably wouldn't even be able to maintain a sitting posture. Yu Qingxi stood up and looked at his painful appearance with a carefree smile. Xiao Ho, do you know what kind of drug you've been poisoned with? You. What a vicious mind. Xiao Ho asked himself if he could do this. When Yu Qingxi saw his deflated appearance, she felt even more carefree. She walked towards the door, and when she was about to walk out, she turned back and said proudly, "However, it's not like there's no way to cure the poison. That's the blood of a virgin. However, you won't have the chance to walk out of this room. None of the women here are virgins, so you should give up struggling." After saying that, he laughed and turned to go out. When the door was closed, the women playing music behind the curtain put down their instruments one after another, lifted the curtain, and all of them leaned towards Xiaoho. Chapter 1284. The smell of the rouge powder immediately surrounded him, causing Xiaoho's surging qi and blood to become even more chaotic in his body, making him feel even more uncomfortable. He couldn't help but miss the clean fragrance on little rascal's body. Thinking of this, he felt his body become even hotter. Those women had long been drooling over his extraordinary appearance. His voice and appearance were both beautiful, like the autumn moon in a frozen pot, making people unable to help but look up and want to appear before him. At this moment, he couldn't move, so he could only let them touch him. Because when they were playing the music just now, the sound had covered Xiaoho and Yu Qingxi's conversation, so they didn't know Xiaoho's identity at all. Each of them only thought of him as a benefactor from an aristocratic family. "Young master, seeing that you're sweating, you must be very hot. This servant will help you take off your clothes and you won't feel hot anymore. Young master, this wine is the treasure of our shop, please try it. Young master, what kind of position do you like? We sisters can serve you properly." These vulgar words came out of these women's mouths, but it sounded like they were flirting, and they didn't feel ashamed at all. Xiaoho closed his eyes tightly, as if he didn't care about these people. He focused on circulating the inner strength in his body. When his clothes fell to the ground, he suddenly opened his eyes. When those women saw the cold light in his eyes, they couldn't help but take a step back. However, it was already too late. A pocket-sized dagger appeared in Xiaoho's hand, and with a wave of his hand, a red mark appeared on the white and tender necks of the women who were singing and laughing just now. Their eyes widened, but they couldn't speak anymore. Not long later, a large group of people lay on the ground, no longer making a sound. After dealing with the crisis in front of him, Xiaoho spat out a large mouthful of blood. This poison would seal a cultivator's 8 extraordinary meridians. He forcefully used his inner strength, so he suffered a backlash, and the poison spread even faster. He leaned against the edge of the table, barely supporting his body to not fall. His men had probably been dealt with by Yu Qingxi, otherwise, they would have appeared by now. Yu Qingxi must have sent people to guard the outside, so there was no way out of the room. His gaze swept towards the window. Through the unlatched window, the dazzling lights from outside shone in, making one feel a little dizzy. However, this was the best place to escape. Fortunately, Yu Qingxi thought that his body was weak and that it was impossible for him to walk out of this room, so she didn't send anyone to stand guard outside the window. He opened the window with difficulty, and after clearly seeing the situation below, he leaped out. Xiaoho leaned against a small alley not far from the restaurant, panting heavily. Being able to leave the restaurant was already an arrow at the end of its flight. At this moment, even walking was difficult for him. He wanted to ignite the signal to summon his subordinates, but he found that his coat was left in the restaurant, and the signal in his sleeve seemed to have fallen off when he jumped out of the window. There was nothing on him that could be used. The cold wall made his mind clear a little. He looked at the dark alley, as if he couldn't see the end. He couldn't help but slowly curl up the corners of his mouth, revealing a self-deprecating smile. After so many years, he was once again forced into a desperate situation. That year, he said that he wouldn't let himself fall into this kind of predicament again, but he raised his head to look at the night sky. The stars and moon competed with each other in splendor, and the clouds were clear for thousands of miles. Didn't they say that there was a deity 3 feet above one's head? But why hadn't those evildoers received their retribution? Could it be that all the grievances had to be buried deep and couldn't be cleared? His expression was sorrowful. Cough cough, he clutched his chest and bent down in pain. A large mouthful of blood soaked the ground beside his feet. At this moment, a figure timidly approached him and cautiously asked, "Young master, what's wrong? Do you need help?" Xiao Ho instantly raised his head and looked at the person standing not far away with a cold glint in his eyes. When he saw that it was a delicate and pretty young lady, he then relaxed his body and leaned against the wall. That young lady saw that his temperament was outstanding, and his posture was tall and straight, like a destitute rich family's young master. She couldn't help but muster up her courage and walked over. "Do you need me to find a physician for you?" The young lady's body fragrance wafted over, causing the surging heat in his body to surge violently. He was almost unable to resist it. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as he stared fixedly at the young lady. Virgin blood? Looking at her attire, she should be an unmarried young lady. The hand that was pressing on his chest suddenly reached out to grab her shoulder and then heavily threw her against the wall behind him. The young lady cried out in alarm. "Scream again and I'll kill you." As soon as the threatening words fell, that young lady firmly bit her lips, not daring to let out the slightest bit of sound. Seeing such bright eyes, Xiao Ho was a little upset. He directly ordered, "Take off your clothes." That young lady's tears fell when she heard that. "Young master, I beg you to be magnanimous. I was just passing by to get medicine for my family. Seeing that you seem to be feeling unwell, I came over to inquire. I didn't mean to offend you. I beg you, let me go." The young lady's tears suddenly made a scene of the past appear in front of his eyes. "Xiao Ho, don't think that no one will punish you for the bad things you've done in this life." A charming young lady appeared in front of him and lightly snorted while pointing at his nose. "Let me tell you, before you walk to the bridge of helplessness and prepare to reincarnate, Mengpo will make you drink a bowl of soup to wash away your memories. Then, the bad things you've done in this life will be borne by the person you care about the most in the next life. At that time, you will be sad and helpless, questioning the heavens why you're not the one suffering. You don't know the reason, but you can only watch as the person you love the most is tortured. This is the reincarnation of the heavens, karma." The scene in front of him was taken away, leaving only the young lady who was trembling in fear. At this time, she saw that he was as gloomy as the messenger of hell and thought that she had angered him again. Her hands trembled, and she silently cried as she tried to undo her clothes. But at this time, a suppressed voice came from above. "Go, don't appear in front of me." The young lady's hands stiffened. She didn't know if she was hearing things, but the strength on her shoulder was released. The tall man in front of her turned around and leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. His expression was one of pain and forbearance. She didn't dare to stay any longer and immediately ran into the alley as if there was a ghost chasing after her. At this time, hearing the sound of panicked footsteps getting further and further away, Xiao Ho reached out to cover his eyes, blocking the light of the stars and moon. The blood dripping from the corner of his mouth became more and more red. Just now, he had given up a chance to live. Just because of the few words that little rascal said at the beginning? He had never believed in those supernatural beings with monstrous strength. Normally, he would only treat them as nonsense. He wasn't a good person. The blood on his hands had long been stained countless times. One more bad thing or one less, to him, didn't make any difference. But when she said that the bad things he had done in this life would be borne by the person he cared about the most in the next life, he could no longer do anything to that young lady. He suddenly felt that he couldn't take this risk. He would rather believe it than not. Not even the slightest possibility. Because he couldn't bear to let her be tortured. Chapter 1285. Inside the King of England's residence. Water Spirit handed over the latest intelligence report and said, "This subordinate has found out who was in charge of the army when Old Master Chu led the army. I didn't expect it to be someone from the Fu family. His name is Fu Kuan. Although he is not a direct descendant, he is very close to the right chief minister's faction. When this subordinate was investigating, I found something very strange. Back then, all the people led by Old Master Chu died on the battlefield. Only that person survived. In the end, he was promoted to an official and is now sitting in the position of the military governor of the border." Xiao Su glanced at the information and frowned slightly. This prince has always suspected that there was something fishy about what happened back then. Otherwise, there would not have been such a misjudgment during the pursuit of victory, causing the army to die on the battlefield. Although this prince did not see or participate in that battle back then, after looking at all aspects of the battle, I feel that General Chu is a rare general. If there had not been an accident at that time, he would not have taken that route to intercept the army. The General Chu that Xiao Su was talking about was Father Chu. During this period, he had studied the battle back then and analyzed Father Chu's battle strategy. He found that Father Chu already had the demeanor of a general at a young age. His strategy was very flexible and he always caught the enemy off guard. In those 10 battles, he basically did not lose. Moreover, he could see that Father Chu did not become arrogant because of the smooth journey. Instead, he was more stable. How could such a cautious person know that there was a tiger in the mountain, but still go to the tiger's mountain and lead the army into a land of despair? Water Spirit and Hualing, Turin, and the others present looked at each other. In the courtyard, Father Chu was still clamoring for Mu Ling to make a giant kite for him. It was hard to imagine that such an innocent and naive Father Chu was a mighty general who commanded the battlefield back then. It was true that one could not judge a book by its cover. They thought, if Father Chu did not become like this today, how mighty would he be now? Then, would their little princess consort not be discriminated against by others? And wouldn't their master have another helper behind him? However, they felt that it was more likely that the young princess consort was beautiful and had a good family background. Thus, His Majesty could not betroth her to their master. Who knows, when the time came, the master would be given an ugly monster. That would be terrible. Therefore, this might be fate making a fool of people. But it was also fated and arranged by fate. Apart from this, what else did you find? Xiao Su looked up and asked Water Spirit. Water Spirit immediately nodded. She really did find something. Old Master Chu was defeated 15 years ago. Back then, many of the Luo clan's disciples were in the army. The Luo family? Xiao Su frowned slightly. He was somewhat puzzled. Water Spirit explained, Master might not know about what happened 15 years ago. At that time, Master was going through a great change. However, it should be traced back to 21 years ago when a major extermination occurred. The Luo family was the maternal family of the third prince's mother. At that time, the Luo family was found to have colluded with others to overthrow the court and betray Sichuan. When His Majesty found out, he decreed that the entire family be confiscated and beheaded. However, the younger children were banished to the borders and the girls were brought to the palace as slaves. But for some reason, the young miss of the Luo family, who was already 16 years old, was also sent to the palace. She did not know if this matter had anything to do with Chu Machen's father, but based on her many years of experience as the leader of the pigeons and her keen senses, she faintly felt that this matter was not trivial. After receiving her master's signal, she continued, no one knows which army those children were sent to at the borders. However, 6 years later, Chu Machen's army was completely wiped out. When he cleaned up the battlefield, he found the corpses of those children. Moreover, the entire family was there. It can be said that now, other than the third prince, there is no one else who is related to the Luo family. These words suddenly caused the atmosphere to become heavy. Although 15 years ago, he had been burned by a fire and had been sealed away for a long time, before that, he had seen the Luo family's glory and status in the Western Pavilion. But now, the Luo family had almost been wiped out. He didn't know if this was intentional or if it was really as Shui Ling had said, they had colluded with the enemy and committed treason, reaping what they sowed. No matter whether these two matters are related or not, you must continue to investigate until the truth comes to light. Xiao Su said in a low voice. Water Spirit obeyed the order. It was very difficult to obtain evidence about what happened 15 years ago. The two people who survived were either from the Fu family or had lost their minds. They could only investigate bit by bit. Xiao Su saw the tiredness on Water Spirit's face and knew that she had not had a good rest. He could not help but say, it was a long time ago, so it will be difficult to obtain evidence. You don't have to be too hard on yourself. Water Spirit smiled when she heard this. Master, you know that this is the only fun I have left. If you take it away from me, I will have nothing left to live for. Everyone present revealed a trace of sadness when they heard her words. If Feng Ling was still here, if he was still here, in the quiet courtyard. Pang Zhijing felt that her entire hand was about to be crippled when she wrote a full piece of paper. It had been a long time since she had used a brush, and it was something that had been used for so long. As she dried the ink, she shook her wrist to relieve her tiredness. Then she picked up the paper and gently blew on it. She looked at the content on the paper and suddenly felt that she was going to die of nausea from writing this. It was like a wife telling her husband before a long journey. She felt goosebumps all over her body. Should she write another one? But when she thought of her wrist, she immediately dismissed the idea. Forget it. Anyway, the one who would be disgusted by the nausea would be Xiao Ho. By the time he wanted to find someone to settle the score, she would already be far away. Thinking of this, she could not help but chuckle. She was like a child who had secretly done something bad and then hid away. It was very exciting, very exciting. The ink on the paper was almost dry. She found a letter and sealed it, then looked around for a place where she could hide it. She could not let him find the letter so quickly. Otherwise, if he became suspicious, she would not be able to leave tomorrow. So she picked up the books on his table and stuffed it into one of the books. Then she covered the other books. She clapped her hands and pursed her lips into a smile. When you see it, it will depend on your luck. Looking at the thick book again, she turned around and walked out of the room. But when she stepped on the stairs, she could not help but stop and look around the courtyard. She had to leave. The longer she looked, the more traces she would leave. It would be harder to erase them in the future. She could not help pursing her lips and lowering her head. She quickened her steps, wanting to leave the courtyard. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Just when she was 1 step away from the courtyard's arched door, she suddenly stopped and looked towards the wall covered in purple wisteria. She saw a figure standing under the wall covered in purple flowers and green leaves. The night wind blew up his blue robe and it fluttered in the air, but it gave her a kind of illusion of pain. You are, Xiao Ho. Her eyes widened. Chapter 1286. When her voice fell, she could clearly feel the other person's body trembling slightly. His body was slightly bent and one hand was placed on his chest as if he was in pain. The moonlight shone through the gaps in the leaves onto his face. His gentle and picturesque brows and handsome figure, who else could it be other than Xiao Ho? After waiting for an entire day, she finally saw him. Pang Zhijing's stomach was filled with anger as she immediately turned around and walked towards him. She angrily stomped on the ground with a bang, bang sound. Xiao Ho, you're too much. I've waited for you for so long and I don't want to wait any longer. I was about to leave when you appeared. I really feel that you're my nemesis, always going against me. Before she could finish her words, she was sternly cut off by him. Stand there, don't come over. Her anger was stifled by his words. She couldn't vent it out, neither could she vent it out. It was as if the person who should be angry was her, but in the end, she was still the one being scolded. She pretended not to care as she curled her lips. If I don't want to go over, then I won't go over. Do you think I want to see you that much? You don't want to see me. The voice in the dark suddenly turned threatening. Pang Zhijing was stunned. What's wrong with this person? It was as if she said she didn't want to see him, he would pounce over and tear her apart. Why was this person so eccentric today? She put her hands on her hips and unhappily said, Then what do you want? You won't let me go near and you won't let me say I don't want to see you. So contradictory. Speaking up to hear, her voice suddenly became downcast. Xiao Ho, your thoughts are so hard to guess. I've always guessed wrong. I give up, I don't want to guess anymore. The evil fire in his body was rampaging everywhere, invading his blood. All his blood vessels felt like they were about to burst. Moreover, when he heard her voice, his entire body felt like it was on fire. Even his breathing became scorching hot. He couldn't help but want to get closer to her, but his rationality told him that he couldn't. However, her downcast voice was like an invisible thread that wrapped around his heart, tightening inch by inch and hurting inch by inch. Then don't guess anymore. You're so stupid, you'll never be able to guess. He lowered his voice and tried his best to sound as normal as possible. No one knew what kind of torment his body was enduring and what kind of torment his heart was enduring. Hearing him say this, her originally dejected mood became even more desolate. She tugged at her sleeves to hide her sadness and pretended not to care. "Tsk, do you think this princess likes to stick a warm face to a cold face? I'm a fool, not stupid. I'm not as cunning and smart as a fox like you. In the future, you'll go your own way, and I'll go mine. In the future, we'll never see each other again. Is that so?" Xiao Ho chuckled. That would be for the best. He could already feel the poison spreading in his body. In another 2 hours, his body would explode and he would die. Thinking of this, the heat on his body subsided a little, and he became a little more clear-headed. At this moment, he heard her say, "Xiao Ho, you're really too hateful, too hateful, too hateful." Hearing her gnashing her teeth but unable to do anything, his heart suddenly softened. The corner of his mouth slightly curved, but there was a fishy sweetness in his throat. He immediately used his chi to suppress it, to prevent her from seeing him in such a sorry state. However, when he used his chi, the chi in his body became even more chaotic. "Since you're so hateful, then don't stay. Go back." He said these words with difficulty, not only because of his lack of strength, but also because he couldn't bear it in his heart. However, in order to make her leave, he could only harden his heart. When Pang Zhijing heard this, her face heated up. It wasn't because she was shy, but because she was embarrassed and embarrassed. The other party already didn't want to see you and couldn't wait for you to disappear immediately. What else could she hope for? What face did she have to continue wasting time with him? She pursed her lips and endured the sourness in her eyes. Her voice was slightly nasal as she said, "Okay, okay, okay, I'll leave. Don't think of me appearing in front of you again." Xiao Ho's lips moved, but he couldn't say a word. The shadow cast by the wall covered the expression on his face. No one could see the intense sadness and loneliness in his eyes. Pang Zhijing saw him standing there indifferently, and her heart felt as if it had been hollowed out by someone. It hurt so much that it was numb. When she thought about how she was going to leave him tomorrow, and how it ended up like this, she wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. However, she clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her flesh, leaving rows of crescent moon marks on her palms. She resisted the urge to go up and question him. After so many days, did he really not have any feelings for her at all? But what could she do even if she asked? She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she had already restrained all the pain. She looked at him deeply and then slowly said, "Xiao Ho, you have to take care. In the days when I'm not around." After she finished speaking, she didn't wait for his response and turned to leave. Her footsteps were quick, afraid that she wouldn't be able to resist turning back. Xiao Ho pursed his lips and didn't say a word. He watched her back gradually disappear into the darkness, and then listened to her voice slowly fade away until it could no longer be heard. Only then did he release all the strength in his body and lean against the wall. He held onto the wall with one hand to prevent himself from falling. At this moment, his face revealed a pained expression. When he returned to the courtyard and found her, he should have avoided her. However, the moment he saw her, he suddenly couldn't bear to leave. His heart was suddenly filled with joy, and he wanted to see her and take a good look at her. Whether or not this poison could be cured was still unknown, but he was afraid that he wouldn't have the chance in the future. So, he could also be afraid. Before he was 6 years old, he lived in fear, afraid that his mother would suddenly abandon him and leave him one day. When he was 6 years old, his mother finally left him alone in the world. At that time, he thought that he had nothing left to lose, and that there was no need to be afraid. However, just now, he realized that he still had something left to lose. He still had a heart to lose. The taste of fear could be so bitter and painful. He grabbed his clothes and gave a low laugh, but it was filled with desolation. He struggled to stand up. He couldn't submit to fate like this. He had to find the medicine to suppress the poison. He wouldn't just sit and wait for death. Even if the heavens wanted him to die, he would fight it out with them. He knew his own body better than anyone else. He had already reached the limit of his endurance. If he waited any longer, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to control himself anymore. Just as he clutched his chest and was about to stagger back to his room, a person suddenly appeared in front of him. His brows immediately furrowed. This medicine lowered his guard so much that he didn't even notice a living person approaching him. However, when he raised his head and saw the person standing under the moonlight, he instantly froze on the spot. He looked at her in disbelief and involuntarily asked, "Didn't you leave? Why did you come back?" Chapter 1287. Under the moonlight, there was a stunned Pang Zhijing. "I may be a little silly, but I'm not stupid. You spoke so weakly earlier, I'm not deaf." When she discovered him, she felt that there was something wrong with him, but because of what he said, she was so angry that her heart was in pain, so she didn't take this into consideration. But when she left the courtyard, her mood calmed down a little, then she remembered his weak and frail appearance standing by the wall, as if a gust of wind would take him away. Her heart ached slightly, and she couldn't care less about those vicious words she said earlier, as she turned around and ran back. Even if she came back perfectly fine, she wasn't afraid that he would laugh at her. Compared to her own face, she was more concerned about whether he was well or not. In this way, she could leave in peace. But at this moment, when she saw him walking out from the shadows, his exposed skin was covered in cold sweat, and his face was also covered in cold sweat. His cheeks were suspiciously red, and his lips were even redder than usual. She couldn't help but suspect if he was sick, and couldn't help but go up to support him. While Xiao Ho, who was caught in an unexpected surprise, when she came close, his face sunk, "Don't come over again." Although his tone was strict, but that light voice didn't have any deterrence at all. And at this moment, to Pang Zhijing, whose health was more important than anything else, this time her skin was extremely thick. No matter how he chased her away, she refused to leave. She walked in front of him, and from such a close distance, she discovered that his entire body was covered in cold sweat, but he was emitting hot air, as if he was in a dual world of ice and fire. Her first thought was that he was having a fever, and her heart was extremely anxious, as she immediately stretched out her hand to support him into the room, and then help him find a doctor. However, when her hand touched his sleeve, it was flung away by him. "Don't touch me." He was almost unable to control himself, and the her in front of him was like a fragrant rabbit, making him want to swallow her into his stomach. So the only thing he could do now was to stay far away from her. "You." Pang Zhijing's heart turned cold. Had he hated her to this extent? He didn't even let her touch him. However, what happened next stunned her. Looking at the blood flowing from the corner of his mouth, she could not help but tear up. Xiao Ho noticed her strange behavior and couldn't take another step forward. He turned sideways and reached out to wipe away the tears on her face. "Why are you crying? Be good." But before his hand could touch her face, he saw the fresh blood stains on his sleeve. He guessed that he had vomited blood again. But he had vomited too much along the way, so he was already numb to it. It was not as painful as the surging heat in his body. Since she had already found out, he had nothing to hide. "I'm injured, but it's not serious. You can go back. I'll take care of it myself." However, as soon as he finished speaking, his body swayed slightly, as if he was going to collapse in the next moment. How could this not be serious? If it was serious, wouldn't he have immediately reported to hell? This time, she didn't care about him. She pulled his arm over her shoulder and half dragged and half carried him into the room. "You, shut up." Xiao Ho wanted to say something but was stopped by her two words. He went into a blank. This was the first time in so many years that someone dared to use such a nasty tone to order him. But he couldn't get angry. Instead, he felt that she was exceptionally adorable. If you say another word, I'll sew your mouth shut with a needle. Let's see if you can still treat me this badly. Worried that he would say something nasty again, she immediately took action and threatened him fiercely. Xiaohou couldn't help but curved his eyes. This was the first time he saw her using his power to intimidate others. But he didn't have any strength left and was unable to make her leave. He would just let her be. When they entered the room, he would find a reason to lure her away. Pang Zhijing didn't know what he was thinking and thought that he had compromised. She heaved a sigh of relief and threw herself into dragging him. But at such a close distance, it could be said that his entire body was leaning on her. That scorching hot breath spilled onto her face, ears and neck, causing her breathing to become hurried. Slightly lowering her head, she could see that his collar was open, that lean chest and, no, he was a patient. How could she let her imagination run wild? She felt ashamed of her thoughts at this moment. Feeling that he was very uncomfortable, she immediately retracted her thoughts. She didn't dare let her imagination run wild as she struggled and persisted to bring him forward. Although he was on the verge of fainting, his mind was still a bit clear. His eyes could see her panting and clenching her teeth as she persevered. His gaze couldn't help but soften. It seemed like he had never looked at her this closely before. The room was just inches away, but his eyes slowly darkened. Even her appearance was slowly drowned in the darkness. Xiaohou, don't sleep. Wake up. Feeling the weight on her body sink, she found that he had closed his eyes and his breathing had become weak. Her heart suddenly panicked and her words began to tremble. She didn't know where the strength came from, but she quickened her steps and brought him into the room. Then she placed him flat on the bed. At this time, his face was flushed and his body was hot. She hurriedly found a wash basin and cloth to draw water for him to wipe his face. But after wiping for a while, his body temperature didn't decrease. Instead, it increased. Her heart became even more flustered. The entire courtyard was quiet and beside her was the unconscious him. In an instant, it felt like the sky was falling down. In the darkness, Xiaohou felt like he was in a furnace. It was as if his entire body was about to be swallowed. Too tired, too painful. His will to live was slowly swallowed up. However, a voice came from a distant place. It was like a clear spring water that poured over his body, allowing him to regain some clarity in an instant. He slowly opened his eyes. After adapting to the light, he saw the person lying on top of him crying uncontrollably. In his eyes, there was a trace of pity. Why are you crying? Pang Zhijing felt a gentle force on her head. She couldn't help but raise her head with tears in her eyes and met his gentle eyes. She was stunned for a moment before she cried out with a wah sound. You scared me to death. I thought you would never wake up again. I searched the entire courtyard just now, but there was no one. I walked around the courtyard once, but there was no one. I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to find me when you woke up. I was also afraid that you would never wake up again. I didn't dare to leave you for too long, so I could only come back. But seeing your breathing become weaker and weaker, I was so scared, so scared. The young girl in front of him pounced on him and hugged him tightly. She cried her heart out. Xiaohou felt that a certain part of his heart had instantly softened, and his eyes were filled with tender love. Don't cry, I'm fine. However, the response he got was an even more heart-wrenching cry. Chapter 1288. She didn't know why, but seeing him lying there so weakly made her heart ache. Compared to his current state, she would rather see him scheming. At least he wouldn't look so lifeless, as though he would disappear at any moment. At this moment, a cold finger slid past the corner of her eye, brushing away her tears. It was gentle and pitiful. She looked at him with her red eyes, tears still rolling down her cheeks like beads from a broken necklace. He sighed softly and said helplessly, I don't usually see you cry so much. You cry like a rabbit. His words were still so vicious. She could tell that he wanted to make her happy, but his pale face and abnormal flushing face made her unable to feel happy at all. She grabbed his hand and asked anxiously, "Did you catch a cold and have a fever? How can I help you?" His fingers were held tightly in her palm, and he could feel her worry and fear. This warmed his heart, but he didn't know how to answer her. "If it's not a fever, then I was accidentally drugged. It's not a big problem. Just let me stay in the room for a while." Pang Zhijing looked at his lowered eyelids and spoke very softly, as though he was trying to hide something. She harumphed and said, "I don't believe you. You vomited blood just now. How can I just let you stay for a while? You're not a cat. You have 9 lives." It seemed that she wouldn't be able to fool him tonight. He panted lightly and said to her, "There's medicine in the room. It's in the cabinet. It's a white bottle. Look for it and bring it to me." Hearing this, Pang Zhijing immediately stood up. "Wait for a while. I'll bring it over quickly." As she spoke, she brushed aside the strands of hair on both sides of her face and turned around to start rummaging. Half leaning against the bed wall, one hand barely supporting the bed. Xiao Ho's gaze followed her movements. Seeing her frantically searching, he could feel that she was genuinely worried, nervous, and afraid. He thought that after his mother passed away, no one would be as sincere as his mother to him. So for so many years, he had always sealed his heart and didn't let anyone get close to him. But somehow, this little rascal in front of him whose face was red from crying had walked into his heart. There were no signs at all. By the time they realized it, they were completely defenseless. If it wasn't for Yu Qingxi's words, he probably wouldn't have been able to face the thoughts in his heart. If it wasn't for the unfamiliar girl in the alley, perhaps he wouldn't have been able to see her position in his heart. Life was such a wonderful thing. Every time you discovered something, you were given a barrier that prevented you from speaking up and expressing your feelings. At this moment, looking at the person in front of him, he could only bury his words in his heart. If he couldn't make it through tonight, then he would take the secret in his heart into the coffin and never let her know. "Can't find it, can't find it. Where is it? Can you hold on for a while? I'll get someone to get you a doctor." She turned her head to ask him in a panic. The more anxious she was, the more she couldn't do anything good. At this moment, she was in such a state. Her whole body was empty, and there was no fulcrum at all. Xiao Ho comforted her, "I can't let others see me like this. Take your time. It's in the innermost grid." She felt very ashamed to let a sick person like him comfort her in turn. She immediately nodded and stabilized her mind to continue searching. Because he had given the order, the subordinates didn't dare to come to his courtyard. That was why the little rascal couldn't find it when she went out for a walk. And his current state was simply unsuitable for others to see him. A long illness turned into a doctor. After so many years, he had also studied some illnesses. Just now, when he took his own pulse, he found that this poison was very strange. Moreover, there were already signs of the poison flaring up. Other than the method Yu Qingxi mentioned, he was afraid that even if the gods came, they wouldn't be able to save him. He might as well let him leave in a more dignified manner. He should have tricked her away at this moment when he was battered and exhausted. But he couldn't bear to let her leave. He wanted to take a few more glances at her in this remaining time. So he used his remaining inner energy to seal all his acupoints, forcing the poison to one place to delay its flaring up. But this could only be maintained for a while and couldn't last long. Moreover, the longer he sealed his acupoints, the stronger the backlash would be. "Found it, found it." At this moment, hearing her pleasantly surprised voice that was about to pierce through the roof, Xiao Ho was called back from his thoughts. He saw her quickly running in front of him and handing him the water and medicine. She looked at him eagerly, urging him to quickly eat it. He nodded and took the medicine and poured a few pills into his mouth. After finishing the medicine, he said to her, "I've already eaten this medicine. You'll get better in a while. It's already so late, you should go back first. Hearing him say that, she believed him and thought that he would really be cured after eating that medicine. Looking at his slightly rosy cheeks, she didn't think that he would use his life to lie to her. Thus, she nodded. It was already very late after this torment. She had to go back so that she could successfully leave tomorrow. But just as she stood up, the person who was originally fine suddenly spat out a large mouthful of blood. It was even more ferocious than before. She stared blankly as his face rapidly paled, not knowing what to do. Didn't you say that I'll get better after eating the medicine? What's going on? Only then did she realize that he was lying to her. Xiao Ho clutched his chest. He thought that he could delay for a while and let her leave without worry, but he didn't expect that he could no longer suppress the poison. The seal on his acupuncture points was broken through due to his lack of strength. Now, he was powerless to stop the poison from spreading through his body at the fastest speed. You should go. I'm already beyond saving. He finally gave in to fate. His entire life leaned there helplessly, as if he had already lost his life force. Pang Zhijing stood there dumbfounded. When she came back to her senses, she pounced on him and grabbed his arm, shaking it hard. I don't believe it. What kind of poison is this? It's so fierce and overbearing. There must be another way. If there's really no other way, I'll go beg Qing Yan and let her think of a way for us. Xiao Ho shook his head with great effort. Don't waste any more time. It's useless. She felt that when she mentioned other ways, she felt his hand tremble slightly. Her eyes couldn't help but light up. He must be lying to her. No, you must have a way. Hurry and tell me. Just as she finished speaking, her entire body was suddenly pulled onto the bed by a force. Her back was pressed against the soft brocade quilt, and her front was enveloped by a wave of hot air. Following that, her lips were bitten by him, and he violently ravaged her mouth for a while before leaving. She opened her eyes and saw that he had fixed her on the bed. Looking down at her, she couldn't see his expression. She could only hear him panting beside her ear, there's a way, but do you dare to give yourself to me? Pang Zhijing's eyes widened. No wonder his entire body was burning up and he didn't seem right. So it was because he was poisoned by this. Since you don't want to, then go back. Seeing her reaction, Xiao Ho let out a sigh of relief. He then pretended to ridicule her and was about to let go. He was just scaring her earlier. However, when he was about to get up, a hand pulled his hand. Chapter 1289. Just as he was about to leave, her hand suddenly grabbed his arm. He was slightly stunned. Looking at her lowered eyes and helpless appearance, he did not move or speak. Because he did not know what she wanted to do. He could only remain silent. However, that pair of eyes hidden under her eyelids suddenly lifted up, timidly but bravely looking at him. That is to say, if I want to save you, I have to do that, like that? He did not expect her to ask such a question, but he still nodded and said in a stiff tone, this poison is similar to an aphrodisiac, but it's different from the one you brought over that day. It has a very strong toxicity, which is why it caused my breathing to become chaotic and my inner strength to drain, just like the scene you just saw. At this point, he no longer planned to hide it from her. Perhaps after knowing the truth, she would leave. He vomited blood twice, which was still vivid in her mind. Thinking about it now, she still felt a lingering fear and worry. After Xiao Ho finished speaking, he felt her hand tremble slightly. He thought that she was afraid and laughed bitterly in his heart. Then, he prepared to move away from above her. Perhaps this way, she would be able to leave. However, before he moved, he heard her say, this is poison, that is an aphrodisiac. Are you sure this can cure the poison? She was still an unmarried girl. When it came to intercourse between men and women, it would always be difficult for her to say it. However, she tried her best to say it, but when she said it, she did not dare to look at the person above her. Xiao Ho did not know what she was thinking, because the heat in his body could not help but surge towards his lower abdomen. In order to fight against that surging desire, he did not have much time to analyze her thoughts at this time, and said in a low and hoarse voice. "That's what you think," she said, "but who knows? The blood of a virgin, hee, maybe it was just used to deceive him, to make him beg for death in that restaurant." If his inner strength had not been sealed at that time, he would have finished him off with a single palm and would not have let him be so free. Just as he was immersed in hatred, a voice suddenly sounded in his ear. Then, it exploded in his ear, blowing him out of that angry and helpless world. "Well, then, let's begin," she said, as if she had suddenly gained courage, and her voice rose at last. However, for Xiao Ho, this sentence brought him into an even more chaotic world. The heat and aura became even more chaotic. Did she know that her presence in front of him was already torture for him? Now, her words had successfully pulled him into a whirlpool. He couldn't help but suck her in and make her sink with him. He took a deep breath and said with difficulty, "Don't mess around. Leave while I can still control myself. I can't guarantee that I won't hurt you when I lose control." She could tell that he was enduring a great deal of pain. The veins on his forehead were bulging as he clenched his teeth. He was a person with great self-control. She had no doubt about this since she met him. The amount of pain he was enduring right now was a testament to how potent the poison was. The so-called fear of hurting her when he lost control was actually because he was afraid that he would force himself on her. When she did not know that he was poisoned with this kind of poison, she had always been hovering in front of him like a moving antidote. But in order to not go against her wishes and not hurt her, he had always thought of ways to make her leave. Then, he would quietly wait for death to come. Even at this point, he was still thinking of her. She suddenly felt that she did not know what words to use to describe her feelings for him at this moment. He was such a proud person. He would rather die than force her. But how did he know that he would force her? "It's okay, you can bully me." Her hand climbed up his arm and finally wrapped around his neck, hanging her entire body on him. "Do you know what you're doing?" Did she know the meaning of the word bully? The two of them were close to each other, which undoubtedly added a fire to his body. The lust in his body was even more vigorous. It was already very difficult to maintain his composure at this time. Hearing her words, he almost broke his cultivation. He bit his lip and hated iron for not becoming steel. She was not affected by his words at all. In her eyes, he was just a paper tiger. Even if she bullied him, he would not be able to fight back. But at this moment, she knew that he needed a reason to convince himself. This time, she raised her head. Her eyes were bright like a mirror that had been washed by water. They were clear, clean, and sincere. "Xiao Ho, I'm willing." These words were undoubtedly a heavy blow that blew away all the reason in his mind. Before he could make his next move, she had already leaned forward and kissed him on the lips. The young girl's fragrance lingered around the tip of his nose as they intimately stuck together. The coldness of her lips slightly relieved the heat in his body. But soon, the fire became stronger and stronger, making him want more. His lust made him lose his reason. He reached out and pulled her into his embrace. He deepened the kiss and his fingers began to wander around her body. It was like a person who had been walking in the desert for a long time and finally found a clear spring. He only wanted to constantly drink it to satisfy himself. People who were deeply immersed in lust were terrifying. Pang Zhijing felt like she was being hugged by him until she could not breathe. His movements were very fierce. Her lips were being rubbed by him and her body was being touched by his hot hands. This was the first time she had tasted something like this. She was unfamiliar and afraid, but there was also a shyness that she did not realize. As they kissed, their clothes were messed up and their breaths were even more chaotic. His hand was on her belt. As long as he gently pulled, he would be able to see the scenery inside. However, he suddenly sobered up. He looked down at the person whose lips were red and swollen from his kiss and whose clothes were messy. He was a bit annoyed. Even though the heat in his body had reached a peak, he tried to restrain himself. "Have you really decided that you can let me bully you? Xiao Ho, you're so long-winded. These kinds of words that were hard to say, don't make her say it a second time. He looked at her pair of moist and seductive eyes and lowered his voice. But who knows, this might be another trap set by Yu Qingxi. Perhaps the blood of a virgin is unable to detoxify the poison. Who knows, maybe the two of them will die together. Then I will accompany you in life and in death. After she finished speaking, she stared blankly and could not help but blush. In the past, when she heard other people say these kinds of words, she only felt that it was mushy. Now that she was in the same situation and in this kind of situation, she naturally said it without any hesitation. She did not feel embarrassed at all. She only felt a little embarrassed. But when she thought about how his body was suffering right now, that little bit of embarrassment immediately dissipated. Xiao Ho was so shocked by her words that he couldn't say anything. Accompany you in life and in death. This was the first time he felt that this kind of oath was so pleasant to hear that it made his heart burst with desire. She had already expressed her stance to this extent. If he continued to hesitate, then he would really be a coward. Chapter 1290. It was unknown when, but outside, dark clouds had gathered. The entire world became hot and stuffy, and the air gradually became oppressive. In summer, the sky was clear and cloudless during the day, but at night, dark clouds gathered and it rained heavily. However, during the day, the sky returned to its original clear state. This was a common occurrence. At this moment, the entire night sky darkened. In the prince's mansion, except for those lit lanterns that were tossed around by strings in the storm, the rest of the mansion was plunged into darkness. The dark night was like a monster with its bloody mouth wide open, swallowing the entire world. And in the courtyard, the tightly shut windows isolated the raging wind and rain. Only the sound of the wind and rain could be heard. Compared to the absolute noise outside, the inside was as quiet as a pool of stagnant water. But not all of them. At least, the suppressed chest that was heaving up and down, the hot air that was spurting out, the slender fingers that were tightly gripping the brocade quilt, and the hand that was hesitating on the belt. Just now, she had already thrown caution to the wind and said something that even she herself found unbelievable. It was like a promise, but also like an oath. How could she let it go to her head? But why did she not feel regret? It was just that the silent appearance of the person in front of her made her feel uncertain. Was it really just her wishful thinking? Although her heart was very sad, but there was no other way. Even if he was not willing, she would still force herself on him. Even if he laughed at her afterwards, she would still save him. If it really could not be solved, then she would accompany him to die for love. He had done so many bad things, the heavens would definitely not accept him. Then she would accompany him to hell. She had sacrificed herself for him, so she must pester him and not let him abandon her. Just as she was alternating between melancholy and indignation, she suddenly heard, "Rip." She lowered her head. Her belt was torn under his hand, and even her outer clothes were not spared. What the hell? Tearing her clothes at the slightest disagreement. Can't you be a bit gentler? If you don't make a sound, then do it so violently. Can you take care of her little heart? Before she could complain, her lips were sealed. Her hands were pinned above her head by one hand, and the other hand followed her exquisite curves down, taking off her clothes. Hey, you, at least give her some mental preparation. Her innocent little face slowly turned crimson, as if the setting sun had spread over the surface of a river. Half of the river was red, and the other half was red. Xiao Ho couldn't help but increase the force in his hand. He heard her moan involuntarily, but his eyes became even darker. The moment his hand touched her sensitive spot, she immediately bent over and giggled. It's so ticklish. Xiao Ho, take your hand away. The wind was howling outside, but it was quiet inside. He could only hear his own violent heartbeat in his chest, as well as the movement of the hot and dry air. At this time, she was like a new moon, softly moaning and smiling in his arms. The air seemed to be soaked in the fragrance of wine, intoxicating him. His eyes sparkled and the color of his eyes changed in an instant. He sealed her lips and seized her breath. His movements became even more violent, as if he wanted to eat her up inch by inch. His sudden attack stunned her for a moment. She thought that he would try peaceful means before resorting to force, but who knew that he would be such a beast? So fickle. Just now, he had mercilessly pushed her away, lied to her, bullied her, and chased her away, but now, wasn't he pulling her over and doing this and that? This was simply too much. Who said that women didn't mean what they said? Weren't men the same? Their mouths said that they didn't want to, but their bodies were very honest. However, in the next moment, she exclaimed, "No, However, the words were sucked into his mouth, and only the sound of was left. He smiled, and his fingers moved slightly, like a half-open flower, sliding behind her ear and neck. Very quickly, it brought about waves of shivers on her skin. Wasn't he poisoned by something? Why was he still in the mood to tease her? The feeling of hanging her in the air and not being in a hurry to make a move really made her feel uncomfortable, but she couldn't pinpoint which part of it was uncomfortable. Actually, Xiao Ho was having a hard time holding it in. However, when he thought about the situation and that it was both their first time, he was worried that his clumsiness would hurt her. He was also worried that the heat in his body would make him unable to control himself. So at this moment, when he still had a little bit of rationality left, he treated her as gently as possible. Originally, today was not their wedding night. To her, he already owed her, so it was even more impossible for him to let her suffer. This was the person he was going to cherish the most in his heart in the future. How could he hurt her at this time? Thus, he was tormented internally, but on the surface, he was gentle and considerate like the spring breeze, slowly controlling his strength. If Pang Zhijing knew what he was thinking, she would definitely shake her head in sigh. He was such a person. Even if the sky fell and the earth sank, he would still be able to maintain a calm and indifferent expression. It didn't matter if he was strong or evil, he was still the person she cared about. Feeling the tension under his skin, as well as the gentleness and care in his movements, she felt like she was being pitied, loved, and cared about. Perhaps it was because he owed her that he treated her this way. He didn't really care about her, but this moment was enough. Regardless of whether it was the painstaking care of him or the unconditional protection he had given her, she felt that she owed him the most. This time, if she could help him, even if she had to sacrifice herself, she wouldn't regret it. Just as she said, she was willing to do everything. Thus, she threw away all her reservations and opened her mouth to kiss him back. Feeling her jerky and clumsy response, the heat quickly flowed to his lower abdomen. He couldn't control himself anymore. His gaze became more and more heated as it locked onto her little face. Just now, the blood in their mouths had mixed in their mouths, so they couldn't tell whose it was anymore. However, this made their blood boil even more. A cluster of flames jumped in his eyes, and then it gradually started a prairie fire. His fingers moved and the two of them took off their clothes, exposing themselves to each other. Being so honest with each other made her a little flustered and helpless. Hot blood was clamoring in their bodies. But when she looked up and saw his eyes that were as wide and gentle as the ocean, all of her panic instantly receded like the tide. She couldn't help but softly call out his name. Xiao Ho. At this moment, he was holding her waist. His eyes moved and he leaned over to kiss her forehead. He was sincere and emotional. You probably don't know how much I like you. I only found out just now. Chapter 1291. However, Pang Zhijing, who was submerged in the endless blue and white world of the sea and fireworks, could only see his lips moving, but couldn't hear what he was saying. You probably don't know how much I like you. I only found out just now. He thought that the most important person in his life, the one he loved the most, was only his mother. On that snowy night, when his mother wept and reluctantly watched him slowly close his eyes, he thought that half of his heart had been hollowed out and there was no chance for it to be healed. However, it was only today that he discovered that at some unknown time, his broken heart had already been mended. There was even a little scoundrel living in it. If it was his past temperament, he would definitely chase her out. However, he didn't. He even allowed her to settle down in his heart. During this period of time, it wasn't that he didn't notice the traces, but he didn't know what it meant. At the beginning, Lin Jiangdong's ambiguous words pierced a small hole in his heart. He was angry and embarrassed and didn't want to investigate, so he threw this question to the back of his mind and ignored it. However, when Yu Qingxi directly questioned him, it was like a sharp arrow that shot towards his heart without holding back. The arrow's aura was like a rainbow that peeled off his disguise layer by layer, forcing him to face his heart directly. As it turned out, he had already slowly integrated this noisy, impatient, and bad-tempered little scoundrel into his life. If it wasn't for this, he wouldn't have forgiven her after she repeatedly stepped on his bottom line. He couldn't even get angry. Previously, all his indulgence towards her was because she was about to become his princess, so it was normal for him to tolerate her. However, in all fairness, if she didn't marry him, would he still spoil her? He would. Sometimes, you don't feel it at all and do as you wish, but you're already taking her into your wings and protecting her behind you. This was also why he detested Yu Qingxi for no reason or rhyme. It wasn't without reason, but it was because his heart ached for little scoundrel being blinded and actually falling in love with trash like that. In his heart, he simply hated her for failing to live up to his expectations. Moreover, he felt rage towards Yu Qingxi for trampling on her sincerity, and he felt annoyed that he wasn't able to appear in her life earlier and isolate trash like that. However, love itself was like that. Two people went through hardships, wore the vicissitudes of life, crossed thousands of mountains and rivers, and then came in front of each other to treat each other's wounds. He was incomparably glad that after going around in circles, she would still appear in front of him. When he saw her return, he had an idea. Could it be that the heavens felt that his life was too bumpy and lonely, so they sent little rascal to his side? If it was, then he would gladly accept it. After he took his revenge, he would spend the rest of his time with her. No matter where he went, imperial power and wealth, if she didn't want it, he wouldn't take it. It was fine as long as she was happy. Actually, to him, those things weren't important. It was just that he had been alone for a long time and didn't have anything he cared about. Therefore, he wanted to take away the things that those people valued the most and snatch away the love of their hearts. That was the best revenge. The poison in his body had already slowly subsided following the two's union. That oppressive feeling of suffocation was swept away. However, when he lowered his head to look at the person lying on the bed, her face was like peach blossoms, dripping with fragrant sweat, and her charming eyes were like silk, but she couldn't help but pant lightly. A flame reignited in his eyes again, and it slowly flourished. As for the rest, it was completely instinctive. Once a person was infected with the taste of ecstasy, they would never be willing to let go again. Your poison has been cured. When the two separated again while panting heavily, Pang Zhijing, who was thinking about his body, worriedly asked. From this angle, what entered her eyes was his lean chest, wide shoulders, and narrow buttocks. It was simply the golden ratio, and that faintly discernible Apollo's belt was simply the rhythm of nosebleeds. She immediately looked away with a red face. He raised his head, his eyes bright, but in an instant, it turned into pain and he cried out in pain. When she saw that he was in pain, her heart suddenly softened. She hugged him with heartache. It's okay, it's okay. It will definitely get better. He nodded, dejectedly, and then when she was feeling heartache for him, he directly blocked her lips. He felt that she was very cooperative and obedient. A smile flashed across his eyes, and then he wholeheartedly immersed himself in, not giving her a chance to regret. It was as if she was floating on the sea again, and he was the only driftwood that saved her life. She could only tightly hug him and sink with him. However, as time went on, she became weaker and weaker, and he became more and more clingy. She slowly came to her senses. She weakly reached out to grab his hands that were constantly messing around. She wanted to question him seriously, but the words that came out of her mouth were no different from acting coquettishly. Your poison, is it cured or not? She was discovered by little rascal. Xiao Ho licked his lips. It was extremely charming, but the words that came out of his mouth made her want to stomp her feet. Although Yu Qingxi isn't a good person, this method of curing the poison didn't lie. Then what are you doing now? Her bright red lips couldn't help but tremble in embarrassment. What should I do? I can't stop anymore. His tone seemed to be innocent and troubled, which made her clench her teeth even more. Be good, don't bite yourself. My heart will ache. As he said that, he lowered his head and covered her lips. He used the nimble tip of his tongue to pry open her teeth that were biting on her lips, and then invaded without hesitation. You, how can you bully people like this? When the two of them separated again, she then had the chance to accuse him. However, her eyes were like spring and water, so moist that it made one want to get close to her. Her entire body seemed to be covered in a layer of powder, so pink and tender that it made one want to touch her. Her charm was overflowing and captivated one's soul. She was like the best in the world, making one unable to stop. He pressed against her, and the moment he entered, he laughed softly in her ear and said, "You can bully me back." Woo, she couldn't help but moan. It was too much, too hateful, and also too embarrassing. But she couldn't push him away no matter what. She could only follow him and leap into the clouds amidst this colorful brilliance. Shallow wine in front of people, hugging by the soft jade lamp. Looking back into the embrace, it was always appropriate. Pain, 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 she gently pushed her husband away. Gradually, she heard the sound of trembling, slightly startled and flushed. They tried and tried more, but there were no gaps at all. This time, the flavor became crazy. They moved, their arms wrapped around each other, their lips close, and their tongues tangled. Deep, shallow, intoxicated, and flying. He looked at her domineeringly and dotingly, blooming under his body. Outside, the rain was heavy and the wind was strong. In the room, it was raining heavily. The sound of the wind and rain covered the soft moans and gasps inside, making people even more indulgent. There are still many things I want. This night is so long, I'll share it with you. Chapter 1292. For the entire night, the wind and rain continued to pound on the earth. In this kind of environment, all living things shrunk their heads, quietly waiting for the storm to end. Slowly, as dawn approached, the rain slowly stopped. The sultry summer heat was swept away, and the entire world was filled with a moist mist. Perhaps it was because it was especially dark before dawn, but no one noticed the mischievous person in the air. In the quiet courtyard, in the restless room, calmness slowly returned. His lust had gradually subsided with the intimate union of the two. She had been tormented by him for the entire night, so she should be tired. Little rascal leaned against his chest, breathing shallowly as she fell asleep. Her innocent and harmless appearance was like a flower in early spring, fragile and petite, as if she would break if he touched her lightly. The flame in his eyes had already disappeared, and his complexion had returned to normal, except that he was still a little pale because he had vomited too much blood. He could clearly feel that the poison in his body had disappeared. He lowered his head to look at little rascal nestled beside him, and softly said, "Beautifully done." He pulled her into his arms, and then hugged her as he gradually fell asleep. Pang Zhijing moved her body, and then smelled a familiar scent. She was relieved to find a place in his arms, and comfortably fell into a deep sleep. The first rays of the morning sun in the summer, once it jumped out of the horizon, it would be the time for the world to brighten. 2 hours later, Xiao Ho slowly woke up, and for a moment, he was still a little stunned, as if in all these years, he had never slept so deeply. He slept until dawn, and when he moved his hand, he felt the person in his arms hugging him even tighter. Memories of last night came flooding in, and his gaze slowly became gentle and tender. He raised his hand to pull her in front of his eyes, and seriously looked at her confused sleeping face, and he couldn't help but smile. When a person who was abstinent suddenly became enlightened, it was as if he had changed his nature, and his attitude towards his sweetheart would not be the same as before. His gaze fell on her dark red lips, and his eyes moved slightly, and then he lowered his head, rubbing against her lips. She was blocked by him to the point that she couldn't breathe properly. She moaned, and just happened to slightly open her lips, allowing him to take advantage of the opportunity to enter, and then sweep away all of her. Last night, she was so exhausted that she couldn't sleep at all. Right now, she was completely following her body's primitive reaction, unconsciously following his movements, and then, her obedient obedience and unconscious closeness to him, as well as the crisp jingle of the bell on her ankle, gave him the same feeling as last night, adding to the fun. It made Xiao Ho's eyes darken, and he could not help but pull her into his embrace and fiercely ravage her. However, considering that it was her first time last night, because he did not control himself, she had already suffered too much. So, for the sake of her health, he could not indulge himself anymore. So after he planted a heavy kiss on her lips, he forced himself to get up. Otherwise, he might leave her here today. He got up, changed his clothes, and stood in front of the bed, feeling refreshed. He hadn't forgotten his plan for today. Seeing that it was still early, he sat in front of the bed and stared at her. After understanding his feelings, he no longer hid his feelings. He reached out and placed her exposed arm under the blanket. When he touched her snow-white skin, his fingertips trembled slightly, but quickly returned to normal. The person who was usually noisy, when asleep, actually had such a gentle and quiet side. He couldn't help but feel that she was a woman who could bring surprises everywhere. Thinking of how she did not hesitate last night, even if it meant risking her life to save him, his heart skipped a beat. That kind of throbbing, once again swept over him. This was the first time that someone didn't ask for anything in return, didn't trade for benefits, held a pure heart, and was willing to give up everything for him. This made him feel a bit flattered, but more than that, he was moved. She really was a woman who made people's hearts warm. But what he didn't know was that after the first time, there would be a second time. He suddenly stood up and walked over to a cabinet. From inside, he took out a purple gold wooden box. Looking at the material, it was quite old. At this time, he opened it, revealing a jade bracelet that glowed with a faint green light. He held it in his hand, and a warm and cold feeling wrapped around his fingertips. This was a bracelet made from a piece of ancient jade. It had the effect of expelling evil and avoiding disasters. If a woman wore it, it would be warm in the winter and cool in the summer. Not only could it regulate the body, it could also absorb some of the poison in the body. This was the so-called expelling evil and avoiding disasters. As time passed, the jade bracelet would become brighter. It could be said that people raised the jade, and the jade raised the person. He returned to his seat, then pulled up her naughty hand that was outside the blanket, and put the jade bracelet on her wrist. Her frame was very slender. Although the jade bracelet was small, it was just right to wear. Moreover, it looked like it was tailor-made for her. It was very suitable. The jade shined because of the person, and the person became more gentle and beautiful because of the jade. He said softly, "This was left behind by mother. It's a family heirloom for my daughter-in-law. I originally wanted to put it on you on the day of your wedding, but it's about time now. You have to take good care of this jade bracelet. In the future, when you meet a woman you like, give it to her. It will be passed down from generation to generation. Our Luo family's bloodline cannot be broken. Mother, I'm afraid that I won't be able to meet someone I like in this lifetime. You're thinking too much. You will. You're still young. Mother believes that you'll meet someone sooner or later." His mother's smiling voice sounded in his ears. His eyes became slightly hot, and he looked at the person on the bed again. "Mother, were you afraid that your son would be too lonely, so you sent her to me?" He held her hand, then touched it to his lips. He said in a low and serious voice, "You can't be careless anymore. You have to take good care of our family heirloom." At this time, there was a light knock on the door. The gentleness in his eyes faded. He lowered his eyebrows and calculated the time. It was about time to set off. His gaze turned slightly and landed on the person on the bed. He slowly said, "When I return this time, I'll have more or less taken my revenge. When the time comes, I'll take you wherever you want to go." When he finished speaking, he bent down and kissed the corner of her eye. Then, without lingering any longer, he got up and left. Because he knew that she was naked under the blankets, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to control himself after tasting her for the first time and wanted her again. Thus, he didn't give himself a chance to turn back. Now was the time to get down to business. He couldn't indulge in love. When Xiao Ho walked out of the room, Lin Jiangdong turned and saw him. His gaze fell on the slowly closing door, and his expression was a little strange. Last night, the princess stayed in the prince's estate. Seeing the joy hidden in his master's calm expression, he didn't need to guess to know what had happened. But now wasn't the time to be concerned about this. He reported, "Lord, everything is ready." "Good, let's go." Chapter 1293. However, just as Xiao Ho got into the car, a gust of wind blew fiercely, and the clear sky suddenly turned dark. Lin Jiangdong frowned. This rain only stopped in the morning, is it going to start again? With that, he turned his head and asked, "Lord, looking at the weather, should we continue?" Xiao Ho sat in the car, his voice was a little faint. No matter how bad the weather is today, this plan must be carried out. Lin Jiangdong knew that Lord had been waiting for this opportunity for too long, and was unwilling to give it up. Thus, after agreeing, he ordered the guards to move forward immediately. Looking at the strong wind outside the window, Xiao Ho's face darkened slightly. He had been waiting for an opportunity to completely overthrow Xiao Su and the Liang clan, and now, the opportunity had finally arrived. With this opportunity, he had already set up a chain of plans, and as long as he played the first part well, then Xiao Su and those people would not be able to escape. For more than 10 years, he had spent all his energy to sharpen his spear, and now, he had to use it on the blade. Thinking of this, his chest suddenly hurt, and a fishy sweetness surged up and overflowed from the corner of his mouth. He frowned slightly, thinking that the remaining poison was not completely removed, but when he checked his pulse, he found out that the poison from yesterday had invaded his internal organs for too long, and it would take some time to clean them up. Today, it only affected his internal energy, but it did not matter. He did not need to do anything today, and only needed to play the role of a weakling. Thinking of this, he did not take this injury to heart, and wholeheartedly focused on the next plan. An hour after he left, Peng Zhijing also showed signs of waking up. In a daze, she felt as if her whole body had been run over by a car, and then had the illusion of rolling through a pile of rocks. She was sore and unbearable, and did not even have the strength to move her arms. After a while, she slowly opened her eyes, and after adapting to the light, she found that at first glance, it looked familiar, but it was not her room. She raised her arm to support her aching forehead, but was shocked by the dense and ambiguous marks on her arm, and immediately woke up. She sat up, and found that not only her arms, shoulders, chest, and lower abdomen were all red marks. Wait a minute. She was not wearing anything, and immediately pulled up the blanket to wrap herself up tightly. It was only after this shock that her memories were reopened. Last night's scene appeared in her mind like a movie. She widened her eyes, shocked and ashamed. Last night, she did not know where her courage came from, to suppress him. If it was a normal time, she would not even dare to think of it. But in the end, he kept pestering her and refused to let go. No matter how she begged for mercy, he kept pressuring her, and she could only let him bully her. She said she could bully him back, but in the end, didn't she let him off easy? This was too much. However, the soreness all over her body and the ambiguous marks on her skin reminded her of how intense the two of them had been last night. So last night, she and he really. She did not dare to think further. That's right, poison. She looked around, but could not find him. From the looks of it, he had already detoxified the poison, and then walked away alive? Hateful. She punched the brocade blanket. After eating, he just left her here. This was too much. Then, when she struck out with her weak hand, she felt even more dizzy. Following that, she felt a cold touch on her wrist, and she couldn't help but stretch her hand out from the blanket. On her wrist, there was an extra bracelet. Although she did not know how to differentiate the variety, but this bracelet looked very comfortable, and looked very nice. Most importantly, it was very comfortable to wear. Who helped her put it on? Xiaoho. At least he still had a bit of conscience. She would treat this as a farewell gift. She took a deep breath and prepared to get down from the couch, but then she saw the floor full of rags. That's right, rags. Yesterday, she was still wearing a dress made of expensive fabric. Now, it had become a rag that could be used to wipe the floor. What a waste. Thinking of how impatient he was last night, her face turned red, and she quickly wrapped herself in the blanket and walked towards the wardrobe. She knew that his clothes were all placed here, so today she would just wear his clothes and wait till she went back to change. She couldn't just walk around with a few rags wrapped around her, she couldn't afford to lose this face. However, when she opened Xiaoho's wardrobe, she found that it was actually neatly stacked with women's clothes, and there were several wardrobes full of them. She remembered that the last few times she came, she had seen him holding a cloak, but there weren't these clothes inside. Could it be that these were prepared for her? She suddenly felt a little guilty, so she casually took out a set and immediately closed the wardrobe. She was afraid that if she continued to look at it, her heart would feel uncomfortable. After quickly changing into the clothes, she found that it was very fitting. Pang Zhijing sighed in her heart, it was indeed prepared for her. But she didn't think too deeply about it. No matter what he did, she would not put it in her heart, otherwise she wouldn't be able to leave even if she wanted to. In the restaurant, Yu Qingxi looked at the dead women on the ground with a gloomy face, then turned around and scolded several subordinates who were in charge of watching. What are you doing? He slipped away right under your nose, and you only found out now. A bunch of good-for-nothings. We also didn't expect that Prince Yi would escape through the window. He is a sickly lord, and no one knew that he could resist the poison. It's our negligence. A bunch of good-for-nothings spoiled my good plan. Yu Qingxi slapped the table with a furious face. It seems that Xiaoho can't be left alive. Send someone to track him down. It's best if he's poisoned, but if he's lucky, get rid of him no matter what, but don't leave any traces. Yes. At this time, one of Yu Qingxi's trusted subordinates came forward and said, My lord, I heard from the courier station that the princess didn't go back last night. Do you think that Prince Yi? Everyone knew what he didn't finish his sentence. Yu Qingxi's face instantly darkened. If Pang Zhijing used him to detoxify him, anger surged in his chest. Go and investigate the princess's whereabouts for me. If she really slept with Prince Yi, don't worry about Prince Yi. He's just a good-for-nothing lord, and he can't do anything. Just keep an eye on him, and get rid of the princess secretly for me. Such a fickle woman doesn't deserve to live in this world with the title of Princess Nan Song. The subordinates present couldn't understand their lord's logic at all. Why did he want to kill the princess? In the end, they found a reason. Perhaps his lord wanted to avenge Miss Ro. However, only Yu Qingxi knew that if he didn't want something, he wouldn't let others have it. If she was already with Xiaoho, then he would send her to hell. He would let her know that he, Yu Qingxi, wasn't someone she could like or discard as she pleased. Chapter 1294. In the King of England's residence. Chu Qingyan and Xiao Su were playing chess in the courtyard. Chu Qingyan was still the one who repented after suffering a crushing defeat. She shamelessly put away the chess piece she had just played, and then righteously said, I didn't think it through just now, so I took it back first. I'll play again after I've thought it through. It's great that you can correct your mistakes. You have to give me a chance to correct myself, right? Xining couldn't help but cover her eyes. Oh my God, such a shameless person must not be her master. She inexplicably felt that her master was always far from her usual dignified and gentle appearance in front of His Highness. From the morning until now, she didn't know how many times her master had acted shamelessly, but His Highness didn't seem to even frown. She covered her eyes again. His Highness doted on her master too much. One was willing to hit while the other was willing to be hit. What else could she say? During this period of time, she witnessed the interaction between her master and His Highness, the sweetness between Yen Luo and Ethereal, and the public display of affection between Lin Chujiu and Lin Chujiu. Xining felt that she was spreading PDA everywhere. She held her heart and felt very sad. For Chu Qingyan, playing chess with the big ice cube could satisfy her desire to be infinitely tolerated and indulged. Moreover, she could endlessly act shamelessly without being thrown out by the big ice cube. Her usual little dark thoughts could be vividly displayed. She just liked to see him helpless but willing to give in to her. In the past, his world was only black and white. He was schemed against and went to the battlefield. He didn't have any interests or hobbies in life, as if he was born to work for the country. She didn't want his world to be so pale and monotonous, so she often pulled him to do things that he hadn't done before. Playing chess shamelessly was just to make him happy and add a little spice to his ordinary life. For Xiao Su, if she used all her usual effort to play chess with the little fellow, she wouldn't have lost so miserably and wouldn't have to regret her moves. However, he just liked to see her following her heart. In front of him, she was as transparent as a stream. She didn't have any calculations, but only placed the chess pieces based on her feelings and mood. She was born from the heart and moved by the reason, which meant that in front of him, she wasn't even willing to play chess with him. He couldn't bear to part with her like this. Because very few people could be as clean and transparent as water in front of another person. Even if it was in front of the person they loved, there was basically no one who would entrust themselves wholeheartedly to another person, and even more so, there was no one who could unreservedly lay themselves out for others to see. But the little fellow did it in front of him. Therefore, he was willing to watch her find excuses to act shamelessly. He was willing to let her act shamelessly for the rest of her life. Thus, the elegant pastime of others became the daily flirting of this young couple. Just when the servants around them couldn't bear to watch this scene, Turan and Hualing walked over. Of course, they really didn't want to disturb their two masters' fun, but they really had urgent matters to deal with. Little Princess Consort, our people are ready. When can we go pick up the princess? Hualing stood in front of the stone table and asked respectfully. Chu Qingyan was just thinking about her next move when she heard this question. She couldn't help but look up at the changing weather above her head and said with a slight frown, "If you're ready, then the sooner the better. Looking at the sky, there will probably be a rainstorm later. It won't be convenient for you to replace the flowers with the trees, but it will be very convenient for you to send the people away. Once the rain comes, the traces will be quickly erased. It will be a good opportunity." Hualing immediately nodded and said, "Okay, Water Spirit is already waiting there with a substitute. This subordinate will take care of the matter as soon as possible." After saying this, after receiving Chu Qingyan's signal, Hualing immediately left the courtyard. After Hualing left, Turan stepped forward and reported, "Master, General Li's men have already arrived outside the city. It is estimated that they will enter the city in the afternoon." Xiao Su's hand that was holding the chess piece paused and the corner of his lips hooked up. "Very good. Continue to pay close attention to his movements. When he enters the city, then report back." "Yes." Turan followed. At this time, Chu Qingyan threw away the white chess piece in her hand and supported her face on the stone table with both hands. Her eyes were filled with joy. "Once General Li arrives, you can hand over." Seeing that her mind was no longer on the chess game, Xiao Su also put down the chess piece and said noncommittally, "Imperial Father's meaning is that as long as General Li returns to the capital, we can hand over." Hearing this, she immediately jumped up, her face full of joy. "Good, good, good. I'm very much looking forward to your handover." Xiao Su reached out to pinch her delicate nose and said with a smile, "I'm about to lose my job, but you're so happy." She quickly moved to his side and hugged his arm, fawningly saying, "If you lose your job, you can start a business. Our fief is so big. It's a bit barren, but we can rely on our own hands to get rich, right? Moreover, we have so many people. When the time comes, we can all go out one by one. We won't have to worry about food and drink, and we can even lead the people to a well-off life." Standing at the side, a scene appeared in Xining's mind. Turin and the other fire spirits didn't have swords on their waists, but sickles. What they carried on their shoulders wasn't a weapon, but a shoulder pole. That scene was too beautiful. She didn't dare to look. Jasper at the side stroked her chin and nodded. In this case, this subordinate can raise a pond of fish. When the time comes, this subordinate can make braised fish, sweet and sour fish, boiled fish. Xining's heart twitched. That was too scary. However, she also wanted to raise silkworms and plant mulberry leaves. When the time comes, she could weave clothes for her master. Indeed, people who didn't belong to the same family would not enter the same house. Hearing the little fellow's words, it seemed that she had already planned all the plans for the future. His mouth couldn't help but curve into a gentle smile. Looking at the person squatting in front of him, he reached out and stroked her head, saying in a low voice, "Okay, we'll be self-reliant and self-sufficient. We don't need to look at other people's faces anymore." She nodded heavily. Xiao Su chuckled, then said, "There's a matter regarding Jean Xian." "What is it?" She tilted her head and asked. "He came to find me yesterday. He wants to resign to the imperial court 1 month after we leave." Xiao Su said slowly. "Ah, you agreed to it?" she asked in surprise. "No, I asked him to consider it carefully." At this time, her head was filled with questions. Why would he resign for no reason? "I heard that he did very well in that position. If it wasn't for the fact that he's too young and is afraid that people will look down on him, I'm afraid that he could have jumped 3 ranks. Hearing this, Xiao Su looked at her deeply. "Back then, Jean Xian entered the imperial court to become an official because of you. Now that we're leaving here, he naturally doesn't want to stay here any longer." These words were like a stone falling into a calm lake, stirring up layers of waves. Chu Qingyan looked at him in disbelief. He's not a person who values power, so you should be able to guess." She suddenly recalled the words he said when he was preparing to enter the imperial court as an official, and a warm current couldn't help but surge in her heart. At this time, Xiao Su stroked her long hair, saying in a gratified tone, "Ian, the people who stay by your side are all very attentive and loyal to you. You're already a successful leader." She nodded. How fortunate was she to be able to have such sincere followers. Chapter 1295. After Pang Zhijing left Xiao Ho's courtyard, she saw Lu standing outside with a conflicted expression on her face. Pang Zhijing didn't know what she was thinking, but she seemed to have made a decision. She lowered her head and was about to rush into the courtyard, not even noticing Pang Zhijing's appearance. Just as Lu was about to barge in, Pang Zhijing laughed and said, "What are you doing?" The sudden voice brought Lu back to her senses. When she saw the person standing by the door, she immediately exclaimed, "Princess, you." Seeing Lu's incoherent manner, Pang Zhijing was puzzled. "What's wrong with you? Princess, are you all right? I waited for you the whole night last night. The butler said that there was no need to worry with Lord around, so he sent me away." But she only needed to worry if Lord was around. Lu was looking at her anxiously and couldn't help but size her up nervously. She looked as if her princess had been taken advantage of. Pang Zhijing met Lu's undisguised gaze and thought of something. She suddenly felt her body heat up and her face flushed red. She wasn't just taken advantage of last night. She was bullied over and over again the whole night, okay? But how could she say something like that? Luckily, the clothes that Xiao Ho had prepared for her were quite tight. Her skin was covered from head to toe except for her face. Otherwise, if the marks on her body were seen, she wouldn't be able to wash them off even if she jumped into the Yellow River. She coughed softly and met Lu's suspicious gaze. She pretended to be calm and said, "What could have happened to me? I just played chess with Xiao Ho the whole night. His chess skills are terrible. I won against him effortlessly. Also, this person is a sore loser. He kept dragging me down and I couldn't sleep well the whole night." Lu was puzzled. She heard that Lord's chess skills were excellent. Why did it sound different when it came to her master? If she continued, she would be exposed. Pang Zhijing immediately walked past her and urged, "Don't just stand there. We should go back." Lu didn't dare to delay any longer. She immediately followed, forgetting all her questions. After getting into the carriage, Pang Zhijing let out a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Lu didn't ask any more questions. Otherwise, she wouldn't know how to continue lying. However, she suddenly thought of something, and it was a very important thing. She and Xiao Ho were so intense last night. Could it be, there was no such thing as a contraceptive pill in ancient times? If he wanted to go to the pharmacy to get a contraceptive soup, he was afraid that it would be too late. However, she comforted herself that she shouldn't be so unlucky as to be hit in one hit. Thinking of this, she comforted herself and relaxed. Then, she threw this matter to the back of her mind. However, she had forgotten that her fight with Xiao Ho last night was not as simple as just a single blow. At this moment, a thunderbolt exploded in the sky. Pang Zhijing couldn't help but open the curtains. She found that the distant sky had been covered by dark clouds. At this moment, the world was dark and a rainstorm was about to come. Thinking of this, a few bean-sized raindrops suddenly fell from the sky and quickly wet the ground. Then, there were passers-by running wildly in the rain. In the blink of an eye, the rain became heavier. The sound of rain came from the roof of the carriage, covering the movements on both sides. "Princess, the rain is so heavy. It just rained last night, and now it's raining again. It's really worrying me to death." Lu was thinking about drying the silks and satins in the princess's dowry. However, it seemed that it would be delayed for another 2 days. Pang Zhijing was thinking about the person who went to Hugua Temple today. She didn't know if the road was easy to walk in such heavy rain. She heard that it was all mountain roads. As soon as this thought surfaced, she suppressed it. There were so many people around him. How could anything happen to him? Moreover, he hid his identity so well. Unless there was something wrong with his head, he wouldn't go against the sickly lord. Thinking of this, she subconsciously touched the jade bracelet on her wrist. If nothing unexpected happened, she would leave this place when she returned to the relay station. She racked her brains to get rid of this identity and this situation. However, when the day really came, she suddenly felt a sense of loss in her heart. It was as if the belief that supported her had disappeared. However, she clearly knew one thing. That was, compared to before, she was even more reluctant to part with him. However, since she had already decided to leave, there was no turning back. "Princess, we've arrived at the relay station." She took a deep breath and walked down the carriage. However, because the weather change was too unexpected, there was no rain gear in the carriage. Moreover, most of the people in the relay station were guards and there weren't many maids to serve them. Therefore, the two of them walked through the long corridor to a place where they could shelter from the rain. Lu volunteered to get an umbrella and left her under the eaves to shelter herself from the rain. She leaned against the wall in boredom and counted the water circles on the ground. As she counted, she became tired. Last night was really torturous. She wanted to sleep no matter where she went. Just as she was cursing Xiao Ho in her heart, a rough voice sounded from the other side of the wall. "Sir, the dozens of masters we brought this time are all here." "Very good. The Crown Prince asked us to disguise ourselves as Xiao Lai and ride to Hugua Temple to assassinate Prince Yi. Now that our men are all ready, we can take action now." After these words, chaotic footsteps could be heard leaving. She could imagine how many people were on the other side of the wall. Pang Huang asked people to assassinate Xiao Ho. Weren't they even allies? Did they turn against each other and become enemies? This wasn't impossible. Two people who were working together could draw their swords to each other if they didn't agree. Would he be in trouble? No, he had so many masters around him. No matter how many men Pang Huang had, they were no match for him. Moreover, she had seen his martial arts. Although it was rare, it was definitely not a problem for him to protect himself. She kept telling herself in her mind to be at ease. At this moment, Lu came over with an umbrella. "Princess, I'm back. The rain is too heavy." The umbrella was almost blown away. Lu's grumbling laughter sounded in her ears, but she didn't hear a word. She followed Lu mechanically to her courtyard. After talking for a long time, she realized that the princess wasn't listening at all. Instead, she was in a daze. After leaving Prince Yi's estate, the princess became a little strange. Although she thought so, she didn't dare to say much. When the two returned to the courtyard, Pang Zhijing stepped into the room and saw Huling, who had been waiting for a long time. She thought of something and immediately said to Lu, who was about to enter the room, "Go to the kitchen and boil a pot of water. I'm thirsty." Lu, who didn't know the truth, was sent away. "Princess, my young princess consort ordered me to come and pick you up. Are you ready?" Huling went forward and asked with a slight bow. Xiao Lai-chi only obeyed his two masters. He was always courteous to others, even to the Sichuan emperor. He wouldn't be respectful because of your high status. Pang Zhijing didn't care that much, but her mind had flown to Xiao Ho at this time. Chapter 1296. "Princess, princess," Huling saw that she did not respond and immediately called out a few times. Pang Zhijing immediately came back to her senses. She waved her hand and said, "It's nothing, I'm thinking about some things." "All right, we can go now." Huling looked at her with a confused gaze, but he could not tell what was wrong. He nodded and walked out. When the two of them came out, Lu happened to walk over. She saw a stranger wearing a bamboo hat beside her princess and couldn't help looking at him with vigilance. She asked her princess, "Princess, where are you going?" Huling looked at Pang Zhijing before pulling on his bamboo hat to wait at the entrance. Pang Zhijing turned around and looked deeply at Lu. "I'm going out for a bit. You properly stay in the relay station and wait for me to come back." Didn't she just come back? Why was the princess going out? But as a servant, she did not have the right to ask this. At this time, she saw the princess walk towards her and then suddenly reach out to hug her. While she was stunned, she heard the princess speak in a low and hoarse voice. "Obediently stay in the relay station. If you miss me, someone will take you away." "Princess." What did that mean? After saying this, Pang Zhijing put away the deep reluctance in her eyes. When she took her hands back, she had already recovered her usual mischievous smile. "I'm just teasing you. I'm leaving." She waved her hand and quickly walked towards Huling before the two of them left together. Lu watched her princess leave and her heart inexplicably hurt. She suddenly wanted to leave with the princess. There is actually no one guarding the relay station today. It seems like it will be very easy for us to leave. At least they won't find out that the princess is missing so quickly. When they find us, everything will have been arranged. Ling's hands were on the back of his head, looking very relaxed. It seemed like he was casually talking to this absent-minded princess, but he was actually helping her relax. However, no one could see that he was in a defensive state. As long as something happened, he would be the fastest to react. She didn't know if it was because all the experts in the relay station were out, but the entire relay station was very quiet, like it was an empty courtyard. Pang Zhijing's heart trembled. Her entire body was like a stone as she numbly walked. "Princess, there is a market today. Our carriage is stuck on the road, but we'll be there soon. There are many citizens inside and outside the city, so it will be good for us to leave the city." Ling continued. It had to be said, today was a good chance to steal the dragon and phoenix. However, the absent-minded princess's eyes suddenly turned cold as she turned her head and said to him, "Ling, can you wait for me for a while? I have something urgent to do." Ling was interrupted halfway and he looked at Pang Zhijing with some confusion. "Princess, what is so urgent? You can tell me and I'll send someone to do it for you." Pang Zhijing's eyes lit up. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly remembered that Xiao Ho and them were sworn enemies. If they knew that Xiao Ho was in danger, they would definitely not help her inform Xiao Ho. Therefore, not only could she not tell them, but she also had to keep this news to herself. She immediately shook her head. Only I can do this. Wait for me outside the city. I'll be back soon. Seeing that Pang Zhijing was deliberately hiding it, Hualing did not ask any more. However, he stopped Pang Zhijing, who was preparing to leave. Princess, wait. After Hualing finished speaking, he put his thumb and index finger to his lips and whistled. Following this, a black horse quickly rushed over from the side of the street. Hualing stroked the horse that ran to his side and then gave the reins to her. Princess, it'll be faster if you ride a horse. Pang Zhijing gratefully looked at him. Thank you. This is what we should do. Pang Zhijing nodded and took the reins. Then she jumped onto the horse and whipped it out of the city. The original Pang Zhijing grew up in the grasslands, so her horsemanship was not bad. Therefore, when Pang Zhijing sat on the back of the horse, her hidden skills were awakened. She breathed a sigh of relief, and then rushed towards Fengtai Mountain. That was the only way to Hugua Temple. A bit faster. She had to tell him this news before those people arrived. Raindrops suddenly began to fall from the sky. Drop by drop, they quickly gathered together. Hualing watched Pang Zhijing's back gradually disappear into the rain and slightly knit his brows. This rain, it came at the wrong time. At this time, in the moving palace. Sir, our people saw the princess ride a horse out of the city. The person playing with the fan heard this and immediately closed his fan. His eyes lit up. Then what are we waiting for? There is such a great opportunity in front of us. Yes, this subordinate will send people out now. When there was only Yu Qingxi left in the room, he shook his head with a look of regret. Princess, oh princess, the roads are slippery in the rain. Why are you going out in this kind of weather? If you're not careful and fall, what will we do if you die? After the regret, his voice was filled with a trace of poison. Relax, this young master is very easy to talk to and will not hold a grudge. Every year, I will go to your grave to burn some incense for you. The carriage heading towards Fengtai Mountain was currently slowly moving. Although it was raining heavily outside, the carriage was as still as a mountain. White smoke rose from the incense burner, dispersing the smell of grass and earth. It lingered in the carriage, refreshing the mind and calming the mind. Xiao Ho leisurely leaned back on the couch, holding a book in his hand. His gaze fell on the pages of the book, but his thoughts drifted elsewhere. Although he had lost his mind because of the poison in the beginning, everything that happened last night was still vivid in his mind. Her delicate and smooth skin under his fingertips, her entire body turning pink under his teasing, as well as the scene of her subconsciously hugging him at the end of each time. He discovered that his heart, which had always been as calm as still water, was suddenly rippling. He closed his eyes, suppressing the heat in his lower abdomen. He couldn't help but rub his forehead. Just thinking about it made him feel a little stunned and a little unfamiliar. However, he was even more impatient to see that little rascal in his arms who was like a blooming flower. At this time, a subordinate's voice sounded from outside. Lord, Crown Prince Pang's people are lying in ambush on Fengtai Mountain. When our people and General Li's people arrive, they will immediately take action. Good, inform Crown Prince Pang's people to wait patiently. It would be best if General Li's people coincidentally saw the assassination attempt on this prince. The play must be complete. His smile was cold. This play originally didn't have General Li's people, but a few days ago, he discovered that their return to the capital coincided with their plan. Since that was the case, it would be a waste not to use it. What was more convincing than having Imperial Father's people see it? At that time, he wouldn't need to make Xiao Su the scapegoat. General Li's people were very familiar with Xiao Lai cavalry. When Pang Huang's people played the role of Xiao Lai cavalry, they were 70 to 80% similar. When today was over, he could sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. When both sides were injured, he would reap the benefits. At that time, he could give that little rascal the life she wanted.